to that, something happened that was kind of really strange that day.
And the first thing she said to us is, "Are you guys familiar with the Brewer Cave?"
Yeah.
I just looked at her and I looked at my sister and I was like, no way.
These myths and stories about who these people were typically talk about giants.
Polygamous in southern Utah, he was kidnapped by him, trying to get the information from him.
This is so exciting. That's him and wife.
There was supposed to have been a curse on that.
My mother and dad never told me that. Never, ever.
Why?
I don't know.
Some people say this really happened, and other people say that it never did happen.
He was a poor man, found a treasure, but it all went south on him.
That finally he was able to break into the upper half and come into a chamber.
I've had comments about the red-haired giant.
The legend says that if you hold a match up, the flame will point to the ancient chamber that is somewhere in this hill.
There is something there.
There are giants, yes. We're aware of people that were of great height.
So there is definitely a story.
She's running. Oh my gosh. Is that like a spring, maybe?
This is the story of the Brewer Cave, told in a way that has not been told before. Over the years, there have been plenty of books and videos published that focus on the cave itself, the artifacts, treasure hunting, speculation of the location, and trying to find it. That's what makes this video different. We're not going on a treasure hunt, digging up old disputes, or exploiting private matters of the past. Instead, we're about to dig into history, sift through stories, and sort out facts from the fiction. Yes, we are about to unfold an incredible story that happened right here in Utah. A story that not many people know about, and those who do either consider it taboo or join the underground conversations that have led to further uncertainty, speculation, persecution, and disrespect of property, community, church, and the families involved. The goal of this video is to fill in the holes of this tattered page in history and bring resolution to this story. We're going to explore the history of a people who once lived on the land and ask, who were they? Where did they come from? And why were they here? As we dive into their history and culture, talk with living descendants and eyewitnesses, we will take what we learn and use that as a lens to sort out truth from myth. As we retell the story of the Brewer Cave by allowing the story to tell itself, it's my goal that you, the viewer, will be edified in the process, and that hope, healing, forgiveness, understanding, compassion, respect, and a desire to learn will be the fruits of unpacking this incredible history mystery. Our story begins with my ancestor, my great-great-great-great-uncle, George Keller. I first shared this story back in April of 2018 in a blog post. I wrote, "Several years ago, when my oldest was just a baby, I traveled one summer afternoon with my family down to visit my Grandma Kavner, my dad's mother, who lives in Manti, Utah. While visiting with her in her home, we learned of some family history books that she had in her house. I asked if I could see them. She was surprised that I had never seen them before. I happened to have my video camera with me. This was before smartphones and just around the time of digital cameras. As I saw that this book was filled with stories, personal accounts, and photos of ancestors I knew little about, I became so excited that I turned on my camera and filmed every page. I then went home and transcribed all the images into text, and then took still shots of the images in my videos. While going through this book, I saw this image of George Keller. At first glance, it looked like my dad. I wanted to know who this ancestor was and why I had never heard of him. I showed the picture to my dad and said, "Dad, he looks just like you." My dad replied, "Oh, that's George Keller. He was actually adopted. He was the son of a Swedish immigrant and a freed black slave. Our family adopted him." This was all new to me. Why had I never heard about George? Though we were not blood related, I had a black American ancestor who was sealed into our family and looked like my dad. I wanted to learn more. I learned that because of the stigma at the time, growing up in a small town of mostly all Caucasian people, George never married. He never had children to carry on his story. Because he witnessed his father's death and was unable to prevent it, I believe he carried around that guilt. He also never had the priesthood because of the era and his race. He must have felt like an outsider at times. My heart ached for this ancestor who I had never heard of until now. My dad has faint yet fond memories of George. He remembers visiting him as a boy, and George, an elderly man then, cooking up dinner in a frying pan. He remembers George being a very kind man. Many of the stories online about George Keller speak of him as belonging to a family of freed black slaves who settled in Sanpete County. This is not true. Here is a true account from George's bio that I transcribed from my grandma's family history book about her great-uncle. Sometime in the late 1870s, a Swedish convert and her daughter immigrated to America. Upon reaching New York, her funds being low, she secured employment in a hotel. While there, she met another convert, a Mr. Anderson. They married, and together they came to Utah, settling in Manti. About 7 months after her marriage to Mr. Anderson in 1879, she gave birth to a mulatto boy, whom she named Joseph Anderson, born the 25th of January, 1880. Naturally, her husband was infuriated. A few months later, he went to Emery County to take up a fare, and his wife remained in Manti with her daughter, then about 9 years of age, and her little son. All kinds of rumors were afloat about them, mostly to the effect that he had written and told her she could come to him, but that she could not bring the boy. She must dispose of him. Nobody wanted the boy, and the town was waiting to see what would happen. One day, Annie, my great-great-grandmother, asked her if she would not be willing to take him. She was in poor health, but she told Annie that if she would be willing to give him the care a child of his age would require, she might go and ask for him. Annie, then 14 years of age, gladly consented to care for him and left immediately for the Anderson home. Millie, Eliza, and Louise, the three youngest children, ages 4, 6, and 8, respectively, were in raptures over the prospect of having a baby in the home and told their brother Jacob where Annie had gone. Quote, "We'll have no Negro baby in our house," he said, and hastily got on a horse and went after Annie, forcing her to return home without completing her errand. Jacob was 12 years old, and being the only boy among 5 girls, was accustomed to having his own way. Annie came back and warned us to keep quiet as she would try again the next day. You may be sure that we said nothing of her plans to our brother. The next day, when he was away from home, Annie went to Mrs. Anderson and asked for the child. The mother gladly consented, and Annie brought him home that afternoon. His sister accompanied him to keeping him from becoming frightened. She took him home that first night and brought him back the next morning and left him. He was 15 months old and just learning to walk. He was an attractive, quick, and intelligent child, and we all loved him. When our brother saw him too, he was immediately won over, whereby his name was changed to George Keller. He became a member of the family and was always treated as our very own. He never saw his mother again, until one day when he was 6 years old, she came to our house on some pretext. She took him on her lap, loved, kissed him, and wept. When she was gone, he asked, "Why did that woman hold me and cry?" Soon after that, she left Manti, and I think she never returned. The boy experienced a normal childhood, but as he grew older, he often seemed troubled, and it was not until after Jacob Keller's death in 1892 that he was told who his mother was. He was quiet and reserved. He lived with Jacob Keller Jr. on the farm in the summertime, but lived at home and went to school in the winter. He loved animals and always had a fine riding horse. It was known that he went to see his own mother in later years, who lived in Emery County, Utah. She had experienced extreme poverty, and he helped her. Those who are to him as brother and sisters entertain the kindest of feelings and deepest sympathy for him. When he reached maturity, he went to southern Utah, where he was given positions of trust and responsibility as sheep and cattle foreman by men who had known him from boyhood. They knew him to be honest, honorable, and highly respected in the community where he was raised. In winter of 1949, he had the misfortune of having his hands frozen, which necessitated the amputation of his fingers. In spite of this handicap, he continued to be self-supporting at the age of 70. This was a pathetic incident in his life. I, Ellen Monk Crawford, can truly say that my grandmother Keller loved George very much, for I well remember seeing him put his arms around her, and of her telling him what a good, fine boy he was. Her sympathy for him and his gratitude towards her formed a bond of love that is hard to describe. She has been heard to say that George had never spoken a cross or unkind word to her. He now resides on the Keller farm, where he hopes he will make his home as long as he lives. Jacob Keller met with many serious accidents, any one of which might have cost him his life, and appeared much more serious at the time than the one which did prove fatal. He had not been feeling well for some time, and when he felt himself slipping from a small load of hay, he did not have the strength to hold on. George, the adopted boy, was driving, and Jacob called him to stop. But the boy could not stop the horses soon enough, and father fell to the ground, striking his head on the handle of a pitchfork. Dr. H.S. Allen stayed at his bedside all night long, but there was nothing to be done. He did not regain consciousness. The next day, the bishop requested Anna Keller to bathe the feet of her husband as a sacred rite, as Martha did the feet of Jesus. The bishop then pronounced a blessing upon him, commending his spirit to God. During the sacred service, in which his family and bishop encircled about his bed, he slipped peacefully away on October 5th, 1892, at the age of 55 years and 4 months. Here's a newspaper article I discovered in which George Keller assisted one of his relatives, Frank Keller, in a gunshot wound. It says Frank Keller is reported to be doing fine and is expected home this week after being hospitalized with a gunshot wound on Wednesday afternoon of last week. He was at the Keller farm north of Manti and was putting a .22 rifle away when it discharged, the shell going through his chest and out under his arm. George Keller was there, and he summoned help. A physician came to the farm and ordered the wounded man taken to the hospital in Mount Pleasant. Examination revealed that it was indeed a lucky shot, for it had passed through his body without hitting any of his vital organs or even a rib. At the time, I had also discovered this article in the Ephraim Enterprise celebrating George Keller. It's titled, "George Keller Observes 86." January 25th was the 86th birthday of George Keller. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. John Anderson. George, as he was known, was legally adopted by Jacob Keller Sr. and his wife, Anna R. Keller of Manti. At the age of 8 years, he was baptized and confirmed a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This was in 1900. We who knew and loved George knew of his early experiences. Some of these were not so pleasant because he was a mulatto, black and white mix. But nevertheless, he was taught to work as a youngster, living on the Keller farm in the summer, and in the winter, living in town so that he could attend school. He was a normal child in every respect, very attractive, intelligent, and quick to respond to those in association. Not once did he hesitate to use his natural musical talent. He played the organ, harmonica, and guitar. He also possessed a wonderful sense of humor, which was enjoyable to his friends and relatives. Even now, he loves to talk, laugh, and joke with all his associates. George completed his elementary grades. Some of his teachers were a Mr. Noyes of Ephraim, William Anderson, Millie Keller, and Leonard Billings of Manti. He loves the church, and although he was not permitted to hold the priesthood, George graduated from seminary after attending for 3 years regularly, an outstanding quality which this man has always possessed is that of honesty. In his entire life, he has never been in jail, or has he ever been dismissed from a job. Paul Smith of Manti has said many times, George could be trusted with any amount of money, and he has been at various times. Even though time is constantly passing by and age making it more difficult for George to see clearly, he still maintains a kind and considerate attitude toward everyone. I recently visited at the home where George resides. He has repeatedly expressed deep appreciation for the people in his life other than family members. Some of these were Rastus Madsen of Mount Pleasant, Parley Madsen of Manti, Cameron Brinkerhoff, and Leo Browns of Provo, Emery King, known as the King Brothers Teasdale. When he was 22 years old, his real mother, Mrs. Anderson, came to Torrey from Emery, about 5 miles, to ask forgiveness for giving him away. Although his hurt was extremely deep, and her apparent guilt a gnawing agony, he calmly told her that there was nothing to talk about, and that he was grown now, and expressed the love he had for those who took him in and cared for him up to this time. While working in the Henry Mountains, he rode his spirited saddle horse within a half-mile of his mother's house every 2 weeks, following the pass to Camp Boulder, constantly reminded of what might have been. George was working for the King brothers living in the Henry Mountains when he got his hands frozen. He visited at Paulson's Cafe very often. It was on one of these visits to Richfield when, because of a horrific storm, he fell dazed from the winter cold into the deep snowdrift Barrow Pit. Because he was on his way back to the Henry Mountains, he was all alone in the dark of the night. He said, quote, "I will always be grateful to the girl who worked in Pace's clothing store in Richfield. She was on her way to work the next morning when she noticed him nearly frozen to death and summoned help. Officers came to his aid, took him to the Richfield Hospital, where his serious condition necessitated immediate amputation of all fingers to the middle joint. This old man at 86 has not forgotten the bitter agony of this accident. He said, quote, "I was in the Richfield Hospital for 53 days, and all the hospital attendants were so nice to me." Jess Keller was the one who picked George up at the hospital. He stayed with him for a few days, then he went to Provo for medical help. He told Jess and Halbert Keller they would reject him when they saw him, but the hospital attendants were very kind and considerate. This was in 1951, and he stayed 1 month because he had the flu, and it developed into pneumonia. He went back to the Keller farm for a while, then returned to work for the King brothers, now able only to do little kid jobs like tending the rams. He received $100 a month for this. George did not have a home after the Kellers died, and he missed them and the kindness they gave him. After his mother and stepfather left Emory, they went to Price, and that is where they died. George would like to know his real mother's name, and also where she is buried. Anyone knowing anything about this, he would appreciate if this information could be relayed to him. Neil Nielsen, Manti Sterling resident, had often told him that he was born in the room next to where he lived. How sad it was that Neil could not have told George more before he passed away at his home in Sterling. It was most pleasant to visit with George, to have him relate various incidents in his life. I hope that sometime soon you can take time out to visit with him. To those who may have any facts concerning Mr. Keller, I would appreciate hearing from you. Oh, when I read this article, personally, I wished I could respond to the call. I would love to have visited George in his home. And someone who did visit George in his home was my dad.
His mother had apparently gone to New York to work in a hotel there, and she got to be friends with a black man that was working at the hotel as well. And they ended up, she ended up getting pregnant and then coming back to Manti, where she was from. She also had a daughter. She started dating this guy from Castledale or somewhere over that way. They decided to get married, and he said that he would marry her and take the daughter, but the boy would have to stay. So that's how my family adopted him, and that's how it came to be. And then he grew up on the farm with my great-grandfather and my grandfather, baling hay, and taking care of the hay and everything. And he was a very nice man. He was mild and very generous and happy all the time. He had been working at the King Ranch down in southern Utah, and he used to drive the cattle up into Wyoming from there. And little did he know that he never knew where his mother had moved to when he got adopted. So he was actually driving the cattle just a block or so away from his mother's house, and he never knew that till later on, that he had been that close to her so many times and always wondered where she had gone. He didn't come back until he lost his fingers, and then he couldn't work at the King Ranch anymore. So Grandpa Keller and some of the other Kellers got this cabin that was in Ephraim and hauled it out to the farm and set it up for him and got water running into it and everything. And he went eventually blind, and he got to where he couldn't find his way back to the cabin if he went out to the outhouse, and he couldn't find his way back. So my grandparents put him in the a rest home in Mayfield, and he lived there until he finally passed away. Now he's buried with the family in the Manti Cemetery.
Now that we have a background on George and his character, let's talk about his connection to the Brewer Cave. Well, one day I had been invited to attend a Book of Mormon conference here in Layton, Utah at the Davis Conference Center. While walking down the hallway on my way to a class, I looked through the window of a door and I couldn't believe what I saw. There on the screen in a darkened room was a picture of my ancestor, George Keller. Curious, I peeked through the door to have a listen. The presenter was Utana Jessup, a field researcher and teacher with the Ancient Historical Research Association. I thought, what were the odds that I would be at a Book of Mormon conference here in Layton, Utah, and happen upon a presentation being given about my ancestor, George Keller. Up until this moment, I had no idea that George Keller was a household name on the Utah Anthropology Underground. I wanted to tell everyone in that room that that was my ancestor. But instead, I decided to have a listen, take notes, which led to the writing of my blog post. I continued in my blog post. I could not find anything mentioning the Brewer Cave in our family history, but according to sources shared online, I found this. Quote, Sometime after the turn of the last century, young George Keller and a lad named Lone Eagle were playing among the foothills of the Rocky Mountains above the farm owned by George's father near Manti, Utah. Coming to a massive overhang, the Indian boy pointed to a hole in the mountainside and explained, "This is a special place, the Cave of the Great Spirit. My father was shown this place by his father when he was a kid. You are the only person other than our people who knows about this place. You must promise not to tell anyone of our secret. Follow me and I will show you inside." The friends explored the site together, and from the cave floor, George picked up a few flint heads to play with in his room back home. Over the years, he kept his promise and never told anyone about the chamber guarded by the spirit of a great Indian chief. Lone Eagle eventually moved away, and George worked on the Keller farm. He lived in a hillside shed above the farm, not far from the cave of his boyhood experience to the east. But he rarely visited the site again and took no further interest in it until he met a man by the name of John Brewer many years later. To learn more about George Keller and the story, I decided I needed to take a trip. Now, before we head down to Sanpete County, let me offer some background and help with understanding Sanpete County accent and grammar. Those with Sanpete County roots who have transplanted to northern Utah can acclimate to the northern Utah accent pretty well. But as much as they try, that Sanpete County accent always wins over. It finds a way every now and then to pop out and say hello. And those northern Utahns who transplant down to Sanpete County, try as they might, eventually succumb to the Sanpete County accent with no mercy. Once you have it for life. My siblings and I were raised in Salt Lake County, but the Sanpete County accent is apparently in our DNA, and it tends to come out when we're all together. So, to avoid getting lost in translation throughout the rest of this video, here's a little help for speaking Sanpete. Let's say you're setting up a good old story plot around the campfire. A northern Utahn would say, "All right, so get this. So we brought some water to the people?" And a Sanpeter would say, "We was bringing them guys some water?" Now, let's say you're teaching life lessons to the grandkids on the front porch. A northern Utahn would say, "You know, in those days, things were very difficult. Let's try it now in Sanpete. In them days, things was real hard, you know." All right, to make sure we really got it down this time, let's say we're at a gas pump, reflecting on a conversation from the distant past. A northern Utahn might say, "When I asked him, he said, 'I'll help you Tuesday morning.'" Now let's try that in Sanpete. "Well, I asked him, and he says, he'll help me Tuesday morning." Okay, now that we've had that quick lesson, we're ready to head off on our trip. I dug into the archives to find this footage of the very last Manti pageant, hoping to find some clues to connect some of the dots.
It was always called the
Is
Manti.
it the Mormon miracle pageant? Shouldn't it be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
You're right.
Miracle pageant.
Since 1967, this pageant had been a tradition in the small town of Manti, drawing in 15,000 people per night, people from all over the world. And in 2019, this tradition came to an end. This was the last performance.
That's what they would take their chisels, and then they would take the chisel and they would hit it with this mallet to shape those temple stones.
It's all the black stone.
Solid. I know, and that's the tools that they used, They'd find a knot, a big knot in the wood. That's what they'd make them out of a knot.
Oh, they would? Wow. That's so neat.
My grandpa Christensen, and he'd walk back and forth.
David Christensen. He was my great-grandfather.
So neat. My grandma helped fund the gardens in front of the temple.
These are the arches. There's down on the river. There's one down on the West Sevier River and one up on the East.
They're still
Coast.
there?
Yeah, no, but they used to be there. I remember when they were there when I was a kid.
That's so cool.
See, these are all the early settlers that came to Manti, and people it's helped. So if you look at our family right here,
There's Willardson. Where? There's our ancestors, the
Look.
Willardsons.
it's David's, and Mom put this on here because there's another David Christensen that lives in Ephraim, and she didn't want him to think it was his name, so she put son of Anders because Anders was his father.
Look at all the little details.
Yeah.
It's like Disneyland, all these details.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little theme park.
And this footage is from 2018. You guys from Manti? Yeah? Hey, so I want to ask you, can you point out to my kids where the Keller farm was? Was it this way? It was over here. On that side. Was it on the, so this is the road going out, was it on the west
Well,
side?
if you guys want to drive down and see it, you can. We'll just go towards Ephraim, and when you get to the airport road, it says airport, there's an airport down there. Go straight down that road and you'll come right to the farm. It takes you right into the farm.
Is it the only farm there? So, but it's not called the Keller farm anymore.
No, but that's the old farm. You just drive right into it. It's a lane. There's a lane, and then there's a new brick house just down the street to the north. That's the guy that owns it now and bought it.
So where is the hills that people always think where the caves are?
Well, they're thinking they're up above that temple.
That's where they think they are.
But I'm thinking if that's the old Keller farms out there. They're thinking it was around here one time. Main Street. Your great grandpa.
Frank Keller. So he was pretty wealthy then if he owned all that land. And then it's all gone. It's all been sold.
Yeah.
It's all been sold. After all these years, I knew it was finally time to take a visit to the Keller farm. But first, let's watch a scene from the very last pageant. On a spontaneous whim, my sister Krista and I decided to take a quick trip down to Manti. We happened to snag the very last motel room available in town and took that as a sign that we were meant to come to Manti. We've made it to our destination.
We are officially here in Manti.
Here, pinch yourself, right?
Right.
Like, we did this. We. I mean, the weather.
Lots of deer.
A whole herd of deer. Bambies everywhere. It was like, I don't know, Chris, it was like a movie. It was like
Definitely.
It had like blizzards and everything but tornadoes.
Yeah, pretty much.
A little bit of road rage we saw.
Oh yeah, that happened.
Saw some bodies on the side of the road. Deer bodies.
Yeah, of course.
Animals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we made it to our motel, and we are going to try what was recommended by the people who own this motel and
Charlie's restaurant.
Charlie's.
Yeah,
that's right.
it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they own the motel and the restaurant, and they recommended the strawberry strudel pastry. Danish.
There we go.
We are Danish, by the way.
We are. We should know
Willardson,
this.
100%. They're from down here. They settled this area.
For sure. That's a fact.
So we felt we had to stay true to that and get this Danish, and the cute girls recommended it. So
We made a lot of friends.
And they recommended this
Dry
bubbly vanilla. So we trust their opinion.
100%.
I think they're honest in Manti.
Yeah, they seem pretty honest. Yeah.
But we're still gonna lock our doors.
Yeah.
So we're gonna what's the word? Tie in for the night?
Oh.
Indulge. Tie in for the what do people say? We're gonna
Hit the hay?
hit the hay.
Okay, because we're in Manti, so
We're in Manti.
country.
You hit the hay. We saw that truck out there. There was hay everywhere.
That was the first key.
I know. You know you're in Manti when there's
Cow smell
all over
something.
your truck.
Definitely a farm smell.
Farm smell. Got the farm smells going on. Might take a candle home with that farm smell. Yeah.
Won't sell many of those.
Do we miss our families yet? No, not really.
No.
They miss us though.
Right.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Till tomorrow. The next morning, we arose bright and early to attend the open house of the newly renovated Manti Temple. and to learn more about our history and the Keller farm.
Thank you.
After all, our ancestors did help build the Manti Temple. Yeah, there's the quarry. That's where they get the rocks for the temple, the stone. Okay, so let's talk about, so we don't forget some things we just learned.
Yes.
Okay, so we met this lady.
She was an angel.
She was an angel. We were sitting there on a bench in the assembly room.
Yeah,
which we did not know existed.
Yep.
And apparently even people who work here or volunteers here didn't know it either. This was their first time finding out. It's a big, big room. Huge.
Gathering.
Like, it's tall.
It's a gathering room.
It's a gathering room. It's really neat. And there was a woman standing there, and we had some questions. And
only 3 temples have this room.
Yes.
I think it's the Salt Lake, the St. George, and the Manti.
Yeah. It wasn't like Nauvoo
was it
or
Cedar City? Is it St. George?
I can't remember. Okay. I don't know. But we learned, we saw a lady, and I had a feeling to go over to her. I was like, I bet she has some stories for us. And she did.
Yes.
And she... St. George. Okay, so speaking about this area, she mentioned something about how neat it was that you have the Manti Temple and then the Ephraim Temple, and there was a significance there.
Yes.
But did we pick up on what that significance was?
She said God has something special prepared for this area.
Uh-huh. And that was about it. She left it at that. So we don't know. But then...
She doesn't know either.
She doesn't know either.
She alluded to that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I'm working on the documentary for the Brewer Cave. And so on the way down here, I put out, I said a prayer that I would maybe learn something new or find someone who knew something about that.
Yep.
And that if it was the Lord's will,
to manifest it,
it would happen. And the first thing she said to us is, are you guys familiar with the Brewer Cave?
Yeah.
I just looked at her and I looked at my sister and I was like, no way. And we said, yeah. I said, I'm doing a video on that soon. We're working on a video. And
her eyes lit up. She wants to be a part of this research for you.
She said to us that the BYU professor who got to come see it testified that he did see it. Yeah. He did see the cave. He did see all of it. Yeah. And that it does exist.
And the witnesses are by 3s.
Yep, and so there's been more than 3 witnesses. Yeah. Anyways, there's definitely something going. There's a connection with the sacredness of this hill where the Manti Temple is, and the people who used to live in this area. And there's just a lot to be learned about the significance of that, which is where this documentary will take us.
Yes.
Yes. So what about this sacred hill where the Manti Temple was built? The hill, known as Temple Hill, was built on a rattlesnake-infested stone quarry. According to local stories, a Native American chief pointed to the Temple Hill, saying the place was the site of an ancient temple and altar, but warned people not to explore the dangerous caves beneath the hill. Other versions of this legend state a tunnel under the hill was dug by a pioneer convinced he'd seen chambers from ancient inhabitants. After a dream warned him to stop digging or he'd meet a terrible fate, he ignored the warning and was later found dead in the tunnel, supposedly killed by a heart attack. When the pioneers first arrived in Manti in November 1849, they arrived to 3 feet of snow and very little protection. The saints dug into a hillside, living out of caves and grottos that protected them from the ravaging winters and cold. However, when spring came, the saints quickly discovered that they had tunneled into a massive rattlesnake nest, with hundreds of snakes suddenly swarming their camps. Miraculously, though, no one was injured or bitten by the snakes. When the location of the spot for building the Manti Temple came into question, here's what Brigham Young said. Here is the spot where the prophet Moroni stood and dedicated this piece of land for a temple, and that is the reason why the location is made here, and we can't move it from this spot. At the Manti Temple rededication, Elder Rasband said, By divine design, the Manti, Utah temple is built on sacred land and has been consecrated by those who for more than a century have faithfully made and kept sacred covenants. It stands as a testament of the people's faith in Jesus Christ, obedience to his laws, gratitude for his love, and recognition of the power of his atonement. Well, it was time to learn more about the Keller farm and property. So, without an appointment, we headed over to the Sanpete County Courthouse, where we were sure to find a map of the property and a surprise. What are the odds I would run into my cousin? My cousin works here at this government building and has access to these archives. And she was my favorite cousin growing up. We were always like this. So this is just too funny. Everything that's happening today is just falling in place for this documentary to happen.
This is kind of a cool thing.
Okay.
I think you'll appreciate it.
I will.
This isn't with our family, but
okay.
This would be...
I didn't even know you did this. I am just blown away.
Brigham Young first got Sanpete County.
Oh my goodness.
And it was from Chief ROP. I just gotta find it really quick.
Okay.
To Brigham Young.
That is so cool.
And it talks about the horse value and what all he traded.
Oh my goodness.
Chief ROP. He signed with an X.
That's his signature?
Because he didn't know how to
sign his name. That is so cool. Oh my goodness. That's a treasure right there. That's amazing. Whoever wrote that has really good handwriting.
There's so many, I can't read it, like some of them. So this is the Grantor Grantee Index.
Okay.
Started in 1888.
Okay.
It's alphabetical. So we'll go to the K's, and then you'll want to look for Keller's. And you find
okay. So it would be in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, at some point.
At some point.
If you didn't sell it before.
That year.
Jacob Keller.
Jacob's one of them, yes. That's him and wife. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
To a Gents Denison, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
That would be out in that area.
Yes, okay. This is so exciting. So we've got the records right here of our family. And my cousin's gonna go get the map to show where the property line would have been. And then we're gonna go visit my grandma, and on the way out, we're gonna drive past the property and get to see all the things that we've heard about only in stories. So we're gonna finally go see the location of everything. This is gonna be really exciting. And just what are the odds that my cousin, who shares the same ancestor, happens to be working at this recorder's office? So cool. Okay, so we have Jacob Keller Jr., who was given land by Peter Lund, 1893. Keller, and then if we go all the way up here, we have Jacob Keller and wife. So maybe this is Jacob Keller Sr. and this is Jacob Keller Jr. down here. So Jacob Keller Sr. was given land March 31st, 1890. Over here, it says description. So right here is the description. So we have SW14, and then down here, SW14. You found me!
It said Talisha on the door.
I know! Look, I just noticed there's a map.
Oh, good. I'm going to put some.
Let's look. Here is a map. So tell me where, if you recognize, where would be the whereabouts of the property. So it says, I have the book open to where their property was.
Oh, you do?
Mm-hmm. It's like a letter. It's like SW. So is that like southwest?
Okay. Well, here's Cemetery Road.
There's Airport Road, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So cemetery, where's the cemetery again? Here. So they own all this land here. Is that what you're thinking?
I don't know. It says Mound right here.
This is all of Sanpete County.
So this will be going up to Salt Lake.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
These are as old as I'm typing.
Oh, this is ancient. I'm afraid of this book. Look at it.
Still, use these. Not this one,
but lots of them. This is so cool. I'm learning stuff.
Who Halbert Keller is.
Okay.
Does that name sound familiar?
No.
I mean, there's Franklin David, which would be Grandma's brother.
Right.
So these aren't as old as I was hoping.
But that's okay.
And then Kendall Keller would be Grandma's cousin.
Okay.
So they all had
So they like
together.
divided it up. Like, so maybe like the first Keller, Jacob Hans? No, it was it Jacob Hans or something? I can't remember. He would have owned all of this and then he would divide it up maybe for his sons. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
So this would be in between Manti and Ephraim, though.
Yeah. Okay, and it's on both sides. So like, where's the main road?
So the east and the west side of the main road.
So our dad was saying, is that true that they had land on both sides of the road, of the highway?
They could have.
Okay.
They could find
The right name. That's so cool. Okay.
But
so
look, that says Keeler, doesn't it?
it does.
Like,
So
that's
this-
a different name.
Yeah, and these are, I don't know what year these
This could have been like these. It could have been sold to these
could
people.
have been like in the way
Yeah.
after the fact.
March 31st is when he got the property.
Isn't that funny? Keller, Jacob, and wife.
And wife.
And wife.
You know,
Like, you're not important.
so weird. That's funny.
It's still kind of like that because they really could have one name. Like, so you're like usually the wife.
The wife.
second.
Yep.
Okay, between Jacob Keller and Anna Keller, his wife Manti.
Let's see. Look at their signatures.
I know. That's so cool.
Was that her maiden name, the R?
I don't know if that's their signatures because it's the same handwriting for both, and it's the same handwriting as all this.
Someone just wrote it.
That would be just
The recorder.
right.
This is an important part of our journey today. We're glad we came here.
Yeah.
This is good. This is really. What do you think about running into our cousin?
So fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It was meant to
Yeah.
be, right?
Yeah.
Like, how cool is that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad I called ahead of time.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That's cool. My sister and I decided to surprise our grandma with a visit and a lemon roll. Our sweet grandma, who's 97 years old and legally blind, didn't know we were coming, but was kind enough to let us visit with her and interview her about the past. Grandma? Grandma!
I wish you could see it, but it is really good.
Oh, I'll bet it's wonderful. How's the best way to do it?
Just put it right in your mouth. It's already on the fork.
Well, I mean,
Here, let me show you. There you go. You got it.
lemon.
Yes!
So good.
Yes!
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And is it still warm? Mm-hmm. Good.
Yes.
How could you buy anything that good around here?
There's a restaurant
I've never
called
tried it.
Charlie's.
Charlie's.
Have you heard of that, Grandma?
Her and several others. I don't know how many. Featherstone and his wife came down
Oh,
Bonjay
wow.
from
Featherstone.
Salt Lake, and they had a special program. They do it every year.
Yeah.
But there was angels
Right.
helping me.
Were there a lot of people there?
The whole place was full.
Oh, wow.
I looked down, and I was by the pulpit. And if I hadn't been by the pulpit, I probably would have fainted.
Oh!
All those white people in white. The whole place was full.
Wow.
Wow.
They do that every.
Yes,
They have that every Christmas.
Oh, a Christmas like a Christmas.
Just for the workers.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
The president wanted me to sing, "Oh, how great thou art." So that's what I say.
Okay, How Great Thou
How
Art.
Great Thou
Lance.
Art.
That was the one.
That's a good song.
Yep.
It was quite long, but I sang it anyway. That's what he wanted.
Did you have a choir or was it just you?
Just me.
That's amazing.
In front of the pulpit.
It was a solo.
It was a solo.
Yeah, there you go.
That's amazing.
Except for the ones above me.
Yep.
Oh, wow. How many voices could you hear from above you?
I couldn't tell you how many. I just heard ladies' voices.
Ladies' voices.
Ladies' voice.
Yeah.
And your mother, you heard your mother's voice.
I got through that.
Okay, let's take a break.
Take a break.
Should I put this in the fridge for later?
There's quite a bit more.
Oh, yeah.
There's a
Oh,
lot.
my word.
There's a lot. It's the size of a baby.
I'll put this
That's pretty big.
Reflecting on her childhood home that's no longer in the family.
Yeah, that was the first house in town to get the lights.
Oh, electricity.
Oh,
electricity.
Oh, the
Okay.
first house.
The first
The very
house.
first one.
Did your
My
mom?
mother worked in the temple.
She did work
But
in
my
the temple.
dad never did.
Okay, and
But they were married in the temple.
they
yeah.
were. And what did she do there? Did she just do? Did she just do all kinds of ordnance work, or what?
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's
They
neat.
never had a cafeteria in the Manti Temple, did they?
That's where I worked for 6 years.
Oh.
I was over it for 6
They had a
years.
kitchen in there?
Big,
But they don't
big.
now, huh?
It's still there, but they're not using it.
Oh.
Okay.
They stopped.
Yeah.
I think they're taking it out of all the temples.
Yeah, because the Jordan River has one, but they don't use it anymore.
Well,
Yeah.
see, they've made them quit.
I wonder
Yeah.
why.
Ever
Well,
since
I
COVID.
don't know, but I think I know why. They're trying to put that money that they were paying all those people to work, because that wasn't free work. I made quite a bit of money there.
Oh.
And instead of taking and putting the money there, they take it and putting it on all these new temples they're building.
Oh, you heard about Ephraim Temple.
Yes.
Do you know where that is being built?
Yes, I do. It's the northeast corner in Ephraim, and it faces west. It'll be facing west.
Oh. What's the progress on it? Is it? Have they started building it yet? Oh, they have. We just didn't see it when we came.
They're starting on it now.
Okay.
That'll be nice, huh?
Yeah. Well, there's so many people. There's so many young kids going to college there that can use it, you know.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. It seems like there was an attic in the temple above the staircase somewhere where they had a room of artifacts.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Of going in any place like that.
They showed me some things when I was going to college here like 25 years ago.
Oh my word.
Yeah. Because the
wow.
power went out in the temple.
Oh.
And we had nothing to do. So they took flashlights and they showed us the artifacts in the temple.
Oh, well, I was baptized in the temple.
Really?
Wow.
They used to baptize us
In the font?
in the font. And when we were 8 years old. And then they took us clear up to the top and outside.
Oh.
So that you could look all over Manti. You could pick out your house in the center ward. I can still remember that was a really neat experience.
That's neat.
When we were 8 years old.
That's fun.
That's so
Then
cool.
they stopped doing it after that.
Uh-huh.
Because I remember Doris is 5.5 years younger than me, my sister, and she wasn't.
Okay.
Then, so they stopped shortly after that.
Wow.
But that was a neat experience I'd always remember.
That's neat. The lady in the temple, she told us today that she believes the land between Manti and Ephraim is really special and sacred.
Somebody, one of those authorities or somebody years and years and years ago said that Manti and Ephraim would be one great big city someday.
Wow.
Wow.
And it's getting that way now.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Be connected and be one big city.
Right.
Wow.
That I have heard, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And it's going to be quicker than you think, too, the way they're building now.
Yes.
Your great-grandmother come here from Switzerland, and at that time, I guess you could get all you wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As many acres as far as wide and as you wanted them. I guess that's how they got it.
Yeah.
Is it on the east and the west side of
It's on the west side of the highway.
of the highway?
In more close. Well, it's where the airport is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's straight west of there, about 2 blocks or something west. It's a very important place, but they sold it, and now they could have made a fortune off from that.
Right.
Yeah.
With that airport there.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So
they practically gave the farm away.
were there 2 different Keller homes, an older Keller home and a newer Keller home? My dad was telling us, he said there was an older Keller home that not a lot of people know about.
Out to the farm.
Is that still there?
What's left of it?
Oh, like the
There's
foundation?
a brick here and there, and it's starting to tumble down, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I could take you out to that old farm. I
That'd
think
be
I can
cool.
still remember.
I'm sure you do, Grandma.
There's a sign that says Keller.
Right.
Yeah.
Keller Lane.
Bing! Go in through there and follow the road on down.
Yeah, that's so
The
neat.
Keller farm.
Yeah.
And didn't they have a house that George stayed in?
Well, a little shack.
A little shack.
A little room. Not as big as my kitchen he lived in. Yeah.
Did you spend any time at the farm, Grandma?
Not very much. I wasn't out there very often.
Did they have cattle?
Oh, yes, a lot of cattle. But they never, ever killed one.
Really?
To eat, you know. They were always sent to California.
Oh, they just raised
they sold them.
But they raised lots of sheep. Big sheep herd.
Did your son Roger help herd the sheep?
He may have had some time. Up on the mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think he told me that.
I'm sure he did, yeah. And then there's a big shed there that my cousin, when he came home from the war, World War II, he wanted to get into the turkey business big time.
Right.
You don't mix turkeys with sheep.
Oh.
You don't do that, or else it kills the sheep.
Oh.
So he had this big shed built there, and it's still there. Never ever used it. But they may have used it years ago, I don't know. It didn't work out for him. That's what ruined the farm.
Wow. Now, why does turkeys not mix with sheep?
I don't know, but that's what they claim. That you don't ever raise turkeys near sheep, or sheep near turkeys.
It kills them.
Yeah. And I think it's the sheep that can't take the
smell.
It's a terrible smell.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what the reason is. That's just what I heard. That might not even be right, but but in our case it was.
Now somebody told us to tell you hi.
Yes.
Who was that?
Frischnecht. Was it Jenny?
Kathy?
Was it Kathy? Yes, Kathy Frischnecht.
Yeah.
She was at the temple
today.
Yeah, and she said, "Tell Caroline hi. We love her."
Oh, she's a good friend. Yeah.
So we said, "Okay, we'll tell her hi."
Well, we're relation to the Frischnecks.
Yeah,
we found.
I told her that. I told her. I said, "We're related to you." I said, "They're in our family tree."
Yeah, we're related. Something to do with great-great-grandmother or something.
Anna Regina.
Goes back
Anna Regina.
Great-great-great-grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It was one of the grandmothers.
So we are related to the Frischnecks.
Yeah.
And I'm just learning all these new things. And I'm over 100, or soon I was going to say, almost 100 years old, and I have my mother, dad never talked about the family.
What?
Oh my goodness.
You know, the people that were related. It's only been 2 or 3 years ago since I heard we were relation to the Madsons.
Oh my goodness.
The Madsons.
I didn't know that.
We have Madsons in my ward, and we found out we're cousins.
Your cousin?
To the Madsons. There's some that live in my ward up in Davis County.
And they know it, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
They didn't write
we found out.
Town.
We found out we're related. They're from down here. And they're in my ward.
And there's a whole lot of Madsons buried out here in the Manti Cemetery. I never knew we were related to the Madsons. My family, my mother and dad never told me that. Never, ever.
Why?
I don't know.
Why would they not tell us, Grandma?
I don't know. I can't figure it out. It was my grandmother, Keller, was a Western skull.
Okay.
Before she married my grandpa Keller. She was a Western skull growing up.
Gotcha.
Her mother was a Madsen.
Oh, okay.
My grandmother's mother. In other words, my great-grandmother was a Madsen.
Wow.
When she was growing up.
Okay.
But why they never talked about it, I don't know. I hate to be almost 100 years old and not know who my relation are right here in this stupid town.
I know, Grandma.
I can't believe it.
I can't either.
I don't know why they didn't ever talk about anything like that.
Yeah, that's so strange.
There's a story there for sure.
You probably know more about it than my parents did. I don't think they knew very much either. I tell you.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about George Keller and the story about the Brewer Cave? How do you feel about that story? The little Indian boy that they went into the cave and they found the mummies?
Well, that's all I know.
That's all you know?
That's what I've heard, and that's all I know, and I don't know if it was true.
We don't know if it was true.
Nobody, I don't think, knows exactly if it was true or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were your feelings? Did you ever have a feeling or an opinion either
I've
way?
always had a feeling that it was true.
I have too.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't go out and tell people that because I'm not sure about it.
I know. You're right.
Yeah. Did George ever talk about it?
You don't hear anybody talking about it anymore, but there for a while they did. Quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
There was a lot said about it.
Yeah.
Did you ever talk to George?
I only went out there a couple times was all.
Yeah. And he never said anything to you?
Us kids that stayed outside and played. That was long before I was married even.
Yeah.
And we just played outside, and we didn't. It's just a little tiny room. There wasn't room enough to even go in there.
Oh.
Two people couldn't hardly be in there at the same time.
Well, how much older was George than you?
Oh, well, guess a long time. Now he's buried out in the Manti Cemetery, right near where my grandpa and grandma Keller are buried.
Okay.
I could show you where that is too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like my grandfather was 12 years older than him. Yeah. He was just a little boy when they took him, the girls. There was 5 girls in the family and 1 boy.
Right.
And Grandpa was the only boy.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
With those 5 girls. And so when they heard about this baby, nobody wanted him. Of course, around Utah, you never seen black people then.
Right, right.
It was just a thing. You just didn't see them. But the people that came from the old country,
Right.
And so he was the only one people knew anything about. And then he was mulatto,
Right.
Very, very handsome.
Yes.
Very, very good looking. And the girls were crazy over him. But he always said when he got older, he'd never, ever get married because he wouldn't want anybody to go through what he'd had to go through.
Right.
Yeah.
Going through school and everything. But they took him in anyway. They heard about him. Nobody wanted him. So these
my goodness.
girls wanted him because he was really a cute little boy.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know just how old he was. Maybe 2 or something like that, 2.5 or something. But anyway, real little at that cute little age. And so they wanted him. They took him out and asked their mother if they could have this little boy or bring him to their home.
Right.
And she says, well, you can bring the little boy here, but you'll have to take care of him. I just don't feel well enough.
Oh,
wow. She didn't feel well enough to help him. That's what she told them. So they went and talked to the mother, and the mother said that was fine, that they could have him.
Oh my goodness.
She wanted to get married to this guy over this town over east of us somewhere.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you can come here and we'll get married, but he said, and bring your little girl. She had a little 5-year-old girl.
Okay.
But you cannot bring that so-and-so black man with you, or black boy with you.
Right.
So nobody wanted him.
Oh, that's so sad.
And he was mulatto. He was a really handsome little boy. Well, they kept him and raised him and graduated from seminary, they said. I don't know about high school, but he graduated from seminary, I know.
I didn't know they had seminary then.
That's what I heard. Anyway, he grew up and there was a lot of girls crazy over him, but he wouldn't have anything to do with them.
Okay.
They didn't want to go through what he'd gone through. So.
Wow.
He was a nice guy, George was. Everybody liked George.
Oh, yeah.
That knew him, He was a good guy. Never got into any trouble or anything that I've ever heard of.
And my dad knew him, huh?
I think so. He probably knew him a lot better than I did.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get out there very often.
Yeah.
In those days, we didn't have cars. We couldn't get in a car and take off and go somewhere.
That's true. So what did you do?
Walk if you had 2 good legs.
Did you guys have horses?
We didn't. We had horses out the farm, but not in town.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Never had a horse in town. We always had a cow, but not a horse.
Okay, so possibly over here.
Possibly over here. Possibly over here.
This is Airport Road. The airport is yonder. And we think we're going to Keller Lane. Here, I'll let you take it, Chris.
We're on our way to Keller Lane.
And we're going to have our hurry. It's 4:10.
Turn left onto East Keller Lane.
Oh, this side.
Yeah, this side. Oh,
That's an old sign. Keller Lane.
yeah, this is our ancestors.
This is our family
at East Keller Lane. Arrived.
Yep. Is it? Is it? Does it say trespassing? Okay. Yeah, I feel like this is someone's property, but it doesn't say. There's a sign right here that says something, like a ranch or something. Huh. Should we go down it? So we can't see it from here. Yeah. You can see that roof. You can see the roof. There's a shack out there. Can you get that one? Yep. He's shacking him. Shack rack. Shack shack. Indigo. Indigo. Okay, there's that house right there. Oh, that's probably it. Yeah, let's just real quick. Yeah, we can. Real quick. He said no one would care. No trespassing. No trespassing. But he said no one would care. He said it. So this is the old Keller house. This is it. This has got to be it. This has got to be it. And there's their farm. They tried to have the turkeys. The turkeys! And the sheep. It's all making sense. It's abandoned because the soil is tainted. Yep. Wow. Oh, there's water running. She's running. Oh my gosh. I don't know. This is the old Keller house, Lindsay. Look, is that George's shack? Or is that the outhouse? Oh my heck, this is it. Oh my gosh. We could put this on something. Holy heck. Oh, shoot. Was George's house probably had a washing machine and a dryer in it. Cheap stuff in there, and old tires and old tools. Here, do you want to take this? Oh my heck, can we there is definitely a story. Do you feel it? There's a story. There's a story. Yeah. There is a story. There's people living there, so we just don't. We didn't have time to if we had time, we would knock on their door and ask if we can walk around and explore. Yes. Yeah, but I have time. She doesn't. But now that we know, I think we need to come back. We need to come back. Yeah, we need to come back and come here first on the way to Manti. Right. And then now that we know. Now that we know. Yeah. I would like to talk to the people who live out here and ask them just what they can tell us about the land and about just the geography, the mountains, what anything they found out here, like arrowheads, you know what I mean, just cool stories. But yeah, that's where George used to live. That's where George lived. We're sure of 100%. 100%. And it's pretty abandoned. It's falling apart. It's in shambles. It's definitely, what do you call it? It's not historic. Safe. It needs to be remodeled. It needs to be a museum. I'm condemned. We need to buy it back. We need to restore it. This is the time of restoration. Turn it into a farm. We need to have people tour this Keller property. Yes.
Now that we have a better visual of the Keller farm, we can move on to the next part of the story, which is John Brewer. John Brewer lived with his wife in the small town of Moroni, Utah, where he did odd jobs for farmers in the area. For recreation, he collected Indian arrowheads and eventually assembled an impressive collection. In early spring of 1955, his numerous artifacts were displayed at the Sanpete County Fair, held annually at Manti. While discussing his finds with his friends at a local cafe, he was approached by a now elderly Negro man named George Keller, who told Brewer about a secret cave where many more arrowheads were to be found, as Brewer recorded in his personal journal for May 10th. I went and looked for the place, but I couldn't find it. So I went and asked him, Keller, again where it was, but all that I could get was a laugh from him. I thought that he was pulling a fast one on me, so I let it go at that. 9 days later, I went out to the Keller place and offered him some wine with the promise that he would show me the place he had told me about a while back. He said that he would not only show me the place, but that we would go in. No wonder I couldn't find it. I was on the wrong hill. I went into the cave and found 30 arrowheads right off. I went back to the truck and thanked the man. I then asked how he came to know of the cave, and he said that he and an Indian boy played there as an old hideaway. In this account from John's journal dated March 30th, 1955, he wrote, "Went to work for Mr. Jack Shand in Manti. While out in the field, he came and asked me to go to the Keller Ranch to get some equipment. I met a Mr. George Keller, and we got to talking about the fair. I mentioned that I was going to try and set up an arrowhead collection to put up on display. He then told me about a cave back of the Temple Hill. He told me there were lots of arrowheads there." So in one account, it's been reported that he met George at a cafe, and in John's own words in his journal, he says that he met George at the Keller Ranch. Well, he then reported on May 19th, 1955, that indeed that's what happened. George Keller took him to the place of the cave. In his own words, he wrote, "No wonder I couldn't find it. I was on the wrong hill. It wasn't on the Temple Hill at all, but the one in back of it. I went into the cave and found 30 arrowheads right off. I went back to the truck and thanked the old man. I then asked how he came to know of the cave, and he said that he and an Indian boy played there as an old hideaway. He said that he had a lot of fun there. Now, in my research, I have not been able to locate this Indian boy named Lone Eagle. It would be my guess that he would have been part of the local Native American tribe in Sanpete County called the Sandpitch, who are a branch of the Utes. However, these stories and accounts give no details about Lone Eagle or his family, just where did he live and who were his parents? How long did he live near George and where did he move to? In all of our family history accounts, there is no mentioning of this incident. Some say that's because it never happened. It was simply a story that John Brewer made up. Others say the reason there's no mentioning of it was because George honored that promise to his young Indian friend. This sacred cave was to be kept secret from the white man, but George was not a white man. There is a long history of friendly alliances between Native Americans and African Americans who lived on the land. In fact, if you're not familiar with the history of the Black Seminoles, I highly recommend you learn about it. And look, there's that pay attention number, 311, 3rd Nephi, chapter 11.
There were also some caves apparently on the west side of the valley, over in the central mountains there between Manti, Ephraim, and Levan, there that were found as well, with a lot of arrowheads and spears and things like that in those caves. So that Palisade Park, a lot of the Indians stayed in that area in the winter, and then went up to Fish Lake in the summer. So they were always moving around. But this little Indian boy that George Keller supposedly became friends with, I can see that happening, because they used to take the sheep up on the mountain all the time, and it probably would have gone right near where he met this little Indian boy, and that might have, they got to be friends, was when they were taking the sheep up on the mountain. There was supposed to have been a curse on that if anyone entered that cave and exposed it, that they would be cursed.
There was a trust and mutual understanding of shared feelings and experiences about the white man. This most likely is the reason that the young Indian boy felt comfortable and safe sharing this secret with George. It is uncertain as to why George would one day reveal that secret to a white man in exchange for wine. Now that John Brewer had the location, he was able to spend time there exploring, and over time he began to discover more than he had anticipated. Steps leading into a chamber, which, as you can see from his drawing, turned out to be a tomb, complete with sarcophaguses, jewelry, artifacts, relics, passages, traps, and dust.
First I heard about it was in seminary down in Gunnison High School when I was probably a sophomore or junior. And they were talking about this Brewer Cave, which was the Keller Cave, but same thing. And was talking about these plates that had been found, and everyone was talking about it. But I had no idea when they were talking about it that it was George Keller was a part of this whole story till years later. People were calling him on the phone and coming to his home and wanting to interview him and his family and stuff. And he lost his son, I believe. His son passed away, which was hard on them. The story goes that he had made those plates up to deliberately make them look like they were fake and false, so people would leave him alone and stop trying to, get him to show them or tell them exactly where the cave was.
For quite some time, John kept the discovery to himself. Eventually, over time, he began to tell people whom he thought he could trust. To test their trust, he created replicas of some of the artifacts and allowed people to take them. If they returned them, they had gained his trust. If they didn't return them, he hadn't lost anything valuable, but he knew they couldn't be trusted. Unfortunately, this method of trust testing backfired on John, as those who had unknowingly been given replicas tested them only to find out they were forgeries. Finally, John gained the trust of Utah anthropologist John Heinerman, and in his own words, he describes this experience.
One time I was up in Salt Lake and stopped down in Provo to visit a man named Rodney Turner. And he used to teach down at BYU. He said, "What do you know about this fellow down in south central Utah, down about where you live?" He said he claimed that he's found caves with large mummies and stone boxes with metal plates. And I go, huh? He said that himself, Paul Chesman, another professor from BYU, and Hugh Nibley were taken down to a community in south central Utah by Marty Peterson and Theodore Tuttle to meet a man named John Brewer. And John Brewer related to them an incredible tale, which they didn't quite know how to take. And so then among themselves, they figured, well, there is something there. We don't just quite know what it is or to the extent of it, so they were very careful, cautious, and they decided to pursue the matter further using archaeologists. Well, John Brewer didn't trust archaeologists. Well, I left and went down. I spent about an hour and a half with Mr. Brewer, and I said, well, I've heard thus and thus from Rodney Turner. And he, oh, yeah, those eggheads from BYU, man. He said, well, you're in a long line of people that have come. It was between Manti and Ephraim up on the east side, way up high. But it was kind of an overhang ledge like this, and then it went back. It went back in quite a ways. It had depth to it, maybe back 15, 20 feet. And so he hollowed it out and dug back in quite a ways and dug down. So obviously, whatever had been supporting this on this side, this debris, he had hollowed up. And he had dug in quite a ways. Well, in digging in one time, he came to, I kid you not, cement steps. And so he dug down, and there were cement steps that went down to a cemented door. It was worked with cement and everything, and so, Johnny was really, excited, so he was trying to figure out how to get in. What happened one winter was there was a lot of snow. That overhang collapsed. And so those steps and everything was covered up with several tons of debris. So then John Brewer, it took him then another several years to figure out kind of where it was. He had it tunnel in, kind of on an angle to about where he thought the doorway was. And finally he was able to break into the upper half and come into a chamber that was, it may have started out as a cave, but it had the workmanship of man. It was chiseled, it was tooled, it was a burial chamber that was filled with hundreds of stone boxes wrapped in pitch pine, different sizes, different shapes.
Here's an illustration of the tomb by the Brewer family, shared by Utah Jessup in her presentation. Here is a sketch of the male and female mummy found in the tomb. This was drawn by John Brewer's son. Utah pointed out that the queen is wearing a headdress similar to what's known as the tablita headdress. Among the Hopi, tablita means crown. Pueblo Indian women still wear the tablita for ceremonial dances in remembrance of their ancient ancestors. The stairs represent a stairway to the heavens, in other words, ascension. And here is a slide of some of the plates that John found in the cave. Over the course of 10 years, John discovered 7 gold plates. As the story of the Brewer Cave has grown fascination over the years, it became a hotspot for YouTubers and those who were just curious to see if it existed. Many local residents are aware of the ancient petroglyphs above the cave that are recognized to be ancient Egyptian.
We are here at the entrance of the cave that we believe this one, since it is the only one on this side of the hill underneath the petroglyphs. So let's go check it out. We are inside the cave that we think that local resident dug. As you can see, it's pretty big in here. I can almost stand, and I'm about 6'2". Anyway, follow me. Let's come in here. You can see in the description of the cave, it takes a right fork into the end here. Now right here you can see there's a dead end right here in the cave, and then it continues on this way. Let's go check that out. I'm a little bit tight in here. As you can see, I'm on all fours getting into the end of this cave. And if you come in with me this way, you can see that it goes into a little pocket back here. It goes up just about a foot or 2 feet or so up that way. And this is where they believe this is where he finished the cave. This is where he hit that CO2 pocket. And died. So this is the end. As you can see, it just goes up a couple more feet. The legend says that if you hold a match up, the flame will point to the ancient chamber that is somewhere in this hill.
John, not being an archaeologist or an anthropologist, ruined a lot of boxes that were like the one in the newspaper. So he went about his archaeology in kind of a quick, fast way. And then, of course, in cleaning the plates, he would use rubbing alcohol and cotton. So fibers of cotton would be caught in the sides of the metal plates, so that later on when Jesse Jennings of the University of Utah looked at some of them, analyzed the cotton, ooh, that's cotton of modern era, phony. And then Jennings looked at some of the cattle brands that were down there, and that said, oh, okay, let's see, cattle brands, descriptions, this is cattle brand description, oh, these are forges. We took cattle brands and forges. So right away, the archaeological world began to condemn John Brewer and said, well, he just made these things up, you'll see that. So that's kind of that was the uphill climb for him. Johnny Brewer found a stone before I came into the picture, and he was with a pick working it, and he went and broke. He had about 2 or 3 or 4 places. So he used Elmer's glue, the super glue, to glue it back together. And then this was displayed down in BYU at the Joseph Smith Memorial Center there. Then the archaeologists looked at it, and of course, as soon as they saw super glue and Elmer's glue, they oh, well, this is fake, you see. And I remember seeing the article, John Brewer has found a cave, but he's not giving tours. That's what the article was about. He found these things, so immediately everyone became interested in Johnny Brewer. But they became interested in Johnny Brewer for only one thing, what he had found and where the caves were. So everyone that would come there, listen to his story, the question they would ask, where's the cave, or can you take me there, or are you giving tours, or I'd be interested in going there. The press was being very hard on him. The other scholars were beating up on him because they wouldn't go to the caves and that. And the government was prepared to move in on John Brewer because, it's like ancient stuff, and Indian stuff, and, that's all protected, you see. I once asked John Brewer, I said, why am I in this? And he said, because I went and prayed and asked my Heavenly Father to send me someone honest. I said, well, I don't know about the honest part, John, but I said, I will tell you that I will respect the thing, and I did. And I have to say that if there's one individual in my life, one, that I never cheated, I never lied, I never betrayed at all, it was John Brewer. We went, drove in the dark between Manti and Ephraim on the east, way up to where he could drive no more. We parked, we walked a good distance. He said, I'm going to take you where where everyone else wanted to see in that. In that chamber, it started out as a burial chamber for a king and queen, people of royalty, and then after that, then at different other times in history, in centuries later, they packed things in there and it became kind of a repository for other things. I mean, you would swear that it was a giant Mongolian. They were laid in the sarcophagus. He had a crown, she had a big fancy headdress that had dragons and stuff on it. I found the remains of a dry cell battery. The ancients had a knowledge of electroplating, and they could do metal work beyond anything that we know. How about copper? The metal plates were surrounded with seaweed. Seaweed that comes from the Gulf of Mexico. What's seaweed from the Gulf of Mexico doing in a burial chamber in south central Utah? So I had that tested, radiocarbon dated. Some of the metal plates, argon dating and that, and some of the boxes.
The box was found to be 4th century BC, around the same time as the Jaredites.
Sometime later, he went up to the cave to think, and he felt the presence of another person in the room who held a light. His first impression was that he had been followed. He was then seized upon a force of power that threw his body to the ground and left him looking at his body from above. While in this state, the person introduced himself as Ether, an ancient spirit, and explained that Brewer was not to seek financial gain from the things in the chamber, but to protect the discovery.
Utah points out that in the Book of Mormon, in the Book of Ether, the Jaredite nation was described as a large and mighty people accustomed to traveling vast distances and were fierce in battle. They prospered nearly 2,000 years on this continent before their nation was destroyed in a civil war. Hugh Nibley had suggested that the Jaredites were essentially similar to the Mongols in culture. In her presentation, Utah mentioned that the annihilation described in the Book of Ether does not require that every last Jaredite was killed, proposing that there could have been many individuals far away from the battlefield.
The things that were found were very interesting, very amazing, and just not stone and metal, the weapons of war, blades of steel. The ancients covered the Western Hemisphere. Okay? There was a culture that was very large and very big and very powerful. They had chariots, they had steel, they had iron manufacture, they had mastodons, they had uniforms. They built cities of cement, they built cities of wood and houses of wood, and that they had commerce and trade.
With differing opinions on how to handle ancient artifacts, eventually John Brewer parted ways with his friend John Heinerman.
I worked with these things. I lived with Mr. Brewer. I saw what I saw, and I leave this as a video record and have agreed to this interview. You must decide for yourself whether Mr. Brewer was a charlatan, whether I am a charlatan, whether or not these things are real or not.
I thought it was interesting when I was down in St. George. I had that one day, that Saturday or Sunday, I had like 4 different people that talked to me about the Brewer Cave that I didn't even know, had no idea, with including you. And some of the people who lived down there just happened to bring up the Brewer Cave. And we got talking about it and found out all of us had so much in common and had no idea that we did until we started talking. That's what kind of got me interested in this again, was that something brought some attention to that. Something happened that was kind of really strange that day, that many people would talk about the Brewer Cave.
Yeah, so maybe now's the time to revisit the story. Yeah. And one of those people that my dad met that day was Mark. Mark happened to be a neighbor of John Brewer. Well, I had the privilege of interviewing Mark, and I had some questions. Is it okay that I'm recording this?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay. With this topic, my whole purpose is not to go find the cave myself, or I'm not a treasure hunter. So I do love Indiana Jones. I love that kind of stuff. But for me, I want to find out who these people would have been, who they were, what's their story, whether or not anyone can ever prove that this cave exists and John Brewer was telling the truth. I want to present a little bit of both sides, but I want to find something in the middle that we can all feel good about. So maybe just tell me a little bit about your background, how you're connected to the story, how you met my dad, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Well, recently we had a parade of homes here. I worked for Mark here in St. George. He brought in other people from other job sites, and that's where Roger came in, your father.
Okay.
And I had never met Roger. We had lunch together or breakfast, and he brought up the subject. I told him I was from Moroni, and he brought up the subject about John Brewer, and he said his family was related to George Keller, who I remember is the person that John Brewer gave him directions to go look for arrowheads.
Mm-hmm.
And so that started a conversation, and then he said that his daughter Lindsay is doing a story. So I was born and raised in Moroni, John Brewer's home. There's one house between his and mine. My dad was real good friends with the two mechanics in town, Merlin and Boyd. And in the 70s, they had became friends with John Brewer. John had told them the story, and they were doing what they could to help him and get credit for it. And Boyd was my home teaching companion. He invited John to come home teaching with us and tell his story. And we home taught the state president. Together we home taught the state patriarch and another woman, a widow, up the street. So 3 times in one night I heard his story. And I think I was 14 at that time. And I was just dumb enough to ask questions like, John, this is fascinating. What happens if you die? No one will know about this. He says to me, oh, Mark, there's no need to worry about that. I've written everything I've done, and it's in a safe deposit box, and my family has access to it.
Yes.
But that night he had 5 small plates that looked like they were made out of lead. They were maybe 3 inches, and strange hieroglyphic writings on them. And then he also had the original drawings of the mummies with him, drawn in blue ink. I've seen lots of Xerox copies, and they say it's drawn with ink. Well, I saw the originals.
Okay.
And he told me that he didn't do them, but his son Johnny did. His son was a year older than me in school, and I knew that his son Johnny did like cartoon characters, warriors. He could draw real well, and he always used ink. That's who he had draw these as he gave instructions to him. Well, I heard the story, and I heard about George Keller telling him where to look, and he went there, and as he was digging looking for arrowheads, the back of the cave sort of gave way, or else he dug it out, and it led to some steps, some stone steps. And as he described it, he dug them out, and it went in a circular path, and I remember he said the 7th step was a hole, a booby trap. He says, if you walked in there in the dark, you would step right into it. And he drops things down there, and he couldn't determine how deep it was.
Wow.
He says as he got looking, there was a separate pathway that went around the step into this cave. And he said that inside the cave on the side of the wall was 2 sarcophagus. He said, I barely had room for my head to fit in. Once I moved the lid off, there was hardly any room for my head to fit in there to look inside. He told me that about being face to face with.
Wow.
And that he tried taking pictures of them with, we had cheap cameras then. He couldn't get a picture to work out.
Really?
Consequently, he had his son draw those pictures of them. He also told me that in this cave there was metal boxes, and he said they were wrapped first with pine pitch or tar, and then they were wrapped with cedar bark. And Boyd told me later that John had promised Boyd, as well as his brother Merlin, that they would each have a chance to open one of those boxes. And as I pictured in my mind the things I heard that night, at the time I thought there was only like maybe 12 boxes. But I've since heard from other people that there was different locations with many block boxes. He told the story multiple times that night. He says, I had to dig this stuff out because it's filled with dust in that cave.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things I found was a small figure. He went like this with his fingers.
Oh.
I took it to maybe be 2 or 3 inches.
Yeah.
But it was a gold figure, a man.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what poser, but it was something about that big. And he says, when I would sift through all this dirt, I would take it and dump it in that hole in the steps. And he says, I misplaced that little gold figure, and I think I dropped it in there. No one ever else has confirmed anything about a little gold figure. That's the story that I got from that night.
So at that point, when he was telling the story that night, how long had it been that he had known about this cave by that point?
I figured it was about 73 when we went around home teaching. And according to that diary that I gave you access to, it was clear back in the 50s that he found the cave.
Okay.
Maybe it was because of conversations with his friends Boyd and Merlin that they wanted to bring notoriety to him, or they were both LDS. Both of them, I don't think at the time were, but they were bishops. Mm-hmm. They were good men. John himself told me that he thought this stuff tied in with the Jaredites because they were so large. That's what he figured. Merlin made arrangements for John to meet in his home with a representative from the church and from BYU. And the representative from BYU was Paul Chessman. John let him take some plates, which they took to BYU. Then they did tests. The word I got back was that he was a fraud. There was an article that came out in the newspaper that he's got a cave, but he's not showing anybody, and it's a big fraud. And I know it caused a lot of grief in John's family. Johnny, his son, when I was on my mission, he was a year older than, so when he came home, they said it was a suicide, but I don't know. There's speculation that it wasn't. He had taken his car out by the mountain over by Wells, which was maybe 6 miles from his home, and there had put a hose into his cab of the car himself. His family didn't know where he was, and it was summertime, and it was several days before they found him. Johnny, the son, had a good friend. I'm friends with him, and I had a conversation a little bit with him. He told me he didn't think it was suicide, that the window in the car was actually open a little bit, as though he had tried to open it up.
Oh, wow.
So David thought it was suspicious, and I do know at the time that the word had got out about this stuff, and there was polygamists, the way I understood it, in southern Utah that had a real interest in this. And I guess they were hounding John Brewer. John told me himself that they took him as though he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped by them, and they tried to get the location of the cave from him. And they burned his arm with cigarettes, torturing him, trying to get the information from him, but he never got it. And I guess at one time that the people hounding him was so bad that he had to seek refuge. In lectures I've been to other people about John Brewer, they said that there's a man in St. George that has maybe 20 of the items from John. And I don't know how they became acquainted. But I moved down here to St. George in 2017, and for some reason I saw a thing about Terry Carter about the cave, and it just piqued my interest. And then I got thinking, I wonder who that guy is in St. George that has this stuff. And I work construction. I worked with various subcontractors, and I'd become acquainted with the landscaper. And wouldn't you know it, he has friends in Moroni.
Oh.
And one day the subject of John Brewer came up. He says, my uncle knew all about John Brewer, and it was only 2 weeks ago that I got looking in some of my notes because of this conversation you and I had. The name was Parrott, P-A-R-R-I-O-T-T, and right now I can't remember the first name. But as soon as I saw that written down, I texted the landscaper, and I says, do you know Parrott? Yeah, that's my uncle. Now that is just plain weird.
Weird, yeah.
That is just plain weird. And in the same conversation I had a week or 2 weeks ago with the landscaper, he said to me, this uncle and his other uncle and also his father, they were involved in doing firesides with this information and sharing about the Jaredites. And they got called in by their church leaders here in St. George to relinquish all the artifacts he had to the church. And he told him no, but he got excommunicated. His uncle got excommunicated.
Oh.
And his father got ostracized, but did not get excommunicated. And he knows another family member in town that's a dentist. He changed his name.
Oh, wow.
In St. George, he had to change his name because they were being ridiculed and persecuted. His uncle is now dead.
Yeah.
We all have our own perspective, but that's what he shared with me.
You knew John Brewer to a degree. What was your feeling about him and his family from when you were 14?
He was a very humble man. The first time I ever met him, they came to Moroni from Manti or something, and they were living in their car.
Okay.
His whole family was living in the car. He was a poor man trying to keep his family alive. He's a small man, very quiet man. He'd had a lot of heartbreaks in his life. He was a member of the church, but he wasn't too active.
Yeah.
We were in the same ward. I was a clerk in the bishopric when he died. I talked to the counselor in the bishopric who went to his bedside when he died. I even questioned him about what the conversation was.
Right.
But it had nothing to do with an apology about his cave. Nothing to do with that. There was no conversation. I worked in the processing plant on the night shift in Cut Up. And after we would get done, there was a crew that would come in and clean up in the late hours of night. So the first crew in the morning, everything would be sanitary. We're working with meat. Well, Doris Brewer, John's wife, was on that crew, and we became friends. I was the supervisor on the shift. She was a cleanup person, but I never talked to her about this stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I never talked about even family members, John Brewer's family members, because small town, I knew the story.
Yeah.
It's like it caused them a lot of grief. And my wife, she was a school teacher for 35 years at North Sanpete. John Brewer had 3 sons. One of those sons was a school teacher, and he retired 2 years before my wife. I have all this interest in John Brewer, but I never went to say, tell me, because I felt like it would be intruding.
Yeah, yeah.
But I thought about it many times, and I thought if I was to sit down with him, this is what I would say. I got to hear your dad tell his story 3 times when we were at home teaching. I'm fascinated with what I heard that night. But I'm also aware that it caused a lot of grief in your family. And I truly believe your dad created imposters or copies and discredited himself to make it all go away.
That's so interesting because my dad has always believed that as well. And you and my dad had never met.
No.
And my dad never met John Brewer, but he just thought it made sense.
And I've read other books from other guys that have heard the story. One guy claims he became friends with John Brewer. John Heinerman's his name. He claims he became friends with John, and John took him in the cave. He got to see stuff. He told, I went to a lecture with this John Heinerman once. He says, I was inside the cave and I felt something really silky, an animal fur that was real silky. It's dark in there. Everything's covered with dust. It's dark. And he says, I shined my flashlight down on it, and it was the pelt with the head on it.
Oh.
And it was a unicorn.
Did he describe it?
He said it was extremely soft. The pelt was very, very soft. And after that, I was so aghast, I didn't even have any questions.
In the burial chamber, there was a nice animal skin, kind of a silky texture, and it had one spiral heart. And that, to me, that was like, wow. So I'm talking about a unicorn. And they were apparently hunted to extinction.
This is John Heinerman making this statement. John Brewer never made that statement. John Heinerman also said that in the cave there was a contraption, some type of a box, something to do with electrostatic electricity. So according to John Heinerman, they were a very advanced civilization that's never been recognized in history. I went to a lecture and I told him I was from Moroni, and he told about John Brewer. He also told about other things he's seen. He said there was a concrete contractor that contacted him, took him out to a cave somewhere in the West Desert by Delta, and inside the cave was multiple mummies all in a circle with their heads in the circle, and they were all 9 feet tall. Stephen Schaefer was the first person I had heard that there was other locations that John Brewer found. Prior to that, I just thought it was the cave. It got me thinking about that night with John Brewer. I recall him saying there's other places too. He had a map or something with several other locations in the valley, a stone map. And we were talking about other locations. It's like his eyes went to Wales. You can see Wales from Moroni, and it was like he looked over there. My discussion that night with John was all about the cave. And my perception was that there was only like 12 boxes.
Okay.
But he had found these little plates inside a box or two that he had opened up. But there was other boxes that he hadn't opened inside the cave. And that's where the promise came that he had promised Boyd and Merlin that they would each get to open a box. I ran into Merlin's son and daughter-in-law, and I said I'd recently seen John Brewer's diary. And she said to me, "Oh, really? I typed that up." She says, when they were going to have Paul Chessman come down, John Brewer let me take his diary and I typed it so that the men that night could see it. It was disturbing when I asked Stephen Schaefer, when I opened up his book, I just happened to turn to that page of John Brewer's diary. And I looked at him and I said, "Where did you get this?" And he looked right at me and he says, "I stole it." They know things that other people don't know, but they keep it a secret, but they want to titillate you with a little bit of information. I've been to several of these lectures, and it's the same people that come. It's like, well, we know, but nobody else does. We get together in this club to talk about this stuff because it makes us all feel good or something. I don't know. It's rather weird.
That is weird. I've come across some groups like that before, and usually nothing good ever comes from it. What do you think his goal was with, buying the land and kind of just having this, I don't know what to call it, like a family treasure or just something he was just keeping for his sons and his family? But then he started to tell people. But what do you think his goal was, especially where he went so long without ever showing his kids and his wife, and he just kind of kept it to himself?
I think he found a treasure, and he was a poor man, and so now he's going to be rich. But it all went south on him, and it just caused grief for him.
If this was a group of the Jaredites, the manner that they were buried, it just seemed like they were great leaders, or a king and a queen, or just...
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Do you think they were righteous at that time, or they were people who had fallen out of God's favor at that time? I mean, for example, with the Book of Mormon, with the gold plates, John Brewer could have just stumbled upon that. That would not have been allowed. That was meant for Joseph Smith, and he was on the right path. He was asking, seeking, praying. He was led to open up the dispensation. That was his mission. I don't think anybody just would have been able to walk along and just start digging. Why was John Brewer, why was he allowed to get as far as he did with it? You know what I mean? When he wasn't seeking or praying. No. Do you know what I mean? And he was kind of not very active at the time in the church. Why was he allowed to get as far as he did with it before he was reprimanded? Here's a quote I found from Brigham Young while editing this part of the video. When Oliver Cowdery went with the prophet Joseph when he deposited the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did. Oliver says, the hill opened, and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. They laid the plates on a table. It was a large table that stood in the room. Under this table there was a pile of plates as much as 2 feet high. There were altogether in this room more plates than probably many wagon loads. There is a seal upon the treasures of the earth. Men are allowed to go so far and no farther. I have known places where there were treasures in abundance, but could men get them? No.
I know he's a poor man, and in his journals he says, I want to get the credit for this, and if he had the opinion of taking the universities that they would all get the credit, he wouldn't get any credit. I just think he's, you know what, I stumbled on this, that's where it's going to end.
Yep.
It's going to end with my death.
It makes me think about the book of Abraham and the book of Moses. The way Joseph Smith was able to get those was a very unconventional way. There was a traveling museum exhibit, and he was able to...
Exactly. In my opinion, whether or not I got it from John or whatever, but those boxes all had plates in them.
Wow.
And they all told family histories, in my opinion.
And those plates never left the cave.
John Heinerman said he went in the cave later and a lot of things were missing. That's what he said.
And we don't know where they ended up. Wow. So just what became of the tomb and its contents? According to Utana Jessup, while serving in the South Sanpete stake in 1974, a bishop was called to meet at the Manti Temple one evening. The bishops and stake presidency were taken to a corner of the temple lot where a chain link fence was being installed. One of the workers had tried to put in a fence post where a hole in the ground had given way. He noticed unnaturally stacked stones nearby, and upon investigating, discovered an entrance to a cavern with steps leading down. The chamber contained the remains of a man and a woman, and many records upon tables. The bishops and stake presidency spent the night removing the contents of the cavern, which were later taken to Salt Lake, and a capstone was put over the entrance to the tomb. It's been so interesting, the breadcrumbs that have just fallen into my path. You're one of them. And the way my dad met you, and then when I reached out to my dad that day and said, Dad, next time you're down in Manti, I want to go with you. I told my dad I had this feeling every Sunday, for some reason it was always on Sundays, text your dad right now or call him and ask him questions about the John Brewer Cave or try to go down to Manti with him. And every Sunday I would just dismiss it like, oh, you know, he's probably at church right now, or I have to go to a choir practice. I just wouldn't do it. And then finally the day I did it, it was on the weekend.
The day he talked to me.
He's like, I just met someone right now. We were just talking about this. What are the odds? And things like that just continued to happen. I wrote it down. I don't have it with me, but I started logging all the little coincidences that were coming up. And that was the first one that just really kind of just affirmed, you know, hey, this is something that you need to explore. So for me, I feel like it's because of what I'm drawn to. I'm not drawn to finding gold. I'm not
either. I just said to my wife, a friend yesterday, I said, I love reading the Book of Mormon. I told this friend, I says, if I lived then, I wouldn't have gone after the gold plates, but by darn, I would have gone to the hill to look for the box. Peter Whitmer went 3 times to the hill and he saw the box. I also found it in another book by Bean. He's the Fighting Mormon. There was a movie put out about him. He said when he first went out there in 1917, around that time, that he saw the box at the foot of the hill, that it was used to anchor a fence, a corner post of a fence.
Really?
Now that's the kind of stuff that's fascinating. I don't want the gold. I just want to go see the can it was in. I've had so many coincidences with John Brewer.
Yeah.
This landscaper's one of them. Another one was I went to a lecture down to Parowan Gap. There was an archaeologist that came and he explained things at Parowan Gap. Afterwards, I talked to him and I says to him, have you ever heard about John Brewer? And he says, yes. I was the one the church contacted to go with John into the cave, but it never transpired.
Oh my goodness.
His name was Garth Norman. He's written a book about the Parowan Gap.
Well, one thing we do know for sure, and that's when Christ was resurrected, all of the righteous who had lived on the earth up until that time were also resurrected with him. Mummies and skeletons that predate Christ's resurrection would not have been part of the righteous. However, it's been stated that this cave was used by various groups of people over the centuries, whom also used it as a burial tomb and suppository. Now, the Manti Cave isn't the only reported location in Utah or in the West where tombs have been found. Here's a screenshot from Utana's presentation with that pay attention number 144. The slide mentions an ancient tomb located deep within the Ute Reservation in the Uinta Mountains. This tomb contained skeletons that were 11 feet tall with red hair and were decorated in full armor. The tomb also contained numerous plates of metal. And there's that pay attention number again, 144, going both ways. This is on a thumbnail for a YouTube video about all the locations of other large skeletons discovered in North America. In a video that was sent to me a few years ago, I took some screenshots about this topic. It mentioned that there are over 200 accounts from indigenous people all over the world describing the Great Flood. And many of them mention 8 rebuilders of ancient civilizations after the Great Flood. They talk about a race of semi-divine humans who helped rebuild ancient sites with advanced technology. The race was described as being tall, pale, and bearded with red hair and elongated skulls. These rebuilders were referred to as sages or magicians and were always depicted with serpents. In the Mayan Empire, they were called the Its, who came in 3 groups. The leaders were Itzamna, as well as the famous Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl. Now I have to say that name, Kukulkan, reminds me of the Ku Klux Klan. So I looked up the etymology of the name Ku Klux Klan, and it turns out it comes from the Greek word kuklos, which means circle. In ancient Mayan, the name Kukulkan means feathered serpent, and the name Ku also means God and sacred. Well, this reminds me of this ancient symbol called Ouroboros. It's a snake eating its tail in the form of a circle. So we have Kuklos and Kukulkan, which means circle and feathered snake. This symbol on the screen called Ouroboros is symbolic of eternity and also symbolizes infinity. Well, the name Ouroboros reminds me of Aurora Borealis, so of course I had to see if there was a connection. And of course there was. Ouroboros symbolizes a reminder from whence we have come and to which we shall return. In the constellations, it's known as the radial line of the serpent, the standard measure for the motions of the heavenly bodies and the cycle of time in the mysteries of mysteries. It is Ouroboros, the serpent, devouring its own tail. The Boros, or northern lights, that has its center at the pole star and its circle divided by a radial line from this pole star to its circumference. The ancients used the serpent to symbolize God and his power. It reminds me of Moses and the brass serpent. Look to God and live. The northern lights and the North Star are also a reminder to look up, to look to God. Pharaoh wore the image of a snake on the front of his headdress to symbolize his deity and sovereignty. And before the Israelites were delivered, the Lord commanded Moses to throw down his staff in front of Pharaoh and his court to demonstrate that Jehovah was the one true God. When Pharaoh's magicians turned their staffs into serpents, the serpent of Jehovah swallowed up the other 2 snakes. This could be why God had Moses use a brass serpent on a staff for the children of Israel to look to so that they wouldn't die from the poisonous snake bites in the wilderness. It would have been a reminder of what happened in Pharaoh's court, as it symbolized the power of the one true God. Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans worshipped a god of medicine in the form of a serpent because it was thought to either give life or take it by giving instant judgment and deciding whether or not to strike. It was also a model of immortality. BYU scholar Andrew C. Skinner points out that Satan could and does usurp other signs and symbols properly applied to God in order to try to legitimize his false identity as a god. This is why Satan chose to appropriate and utilize the sign of the serpent as the best means of deceiving Eve as well as her posterity. Satan came to Eve clothed, as it were, in the garb of the Messiah, using the signs, symbols, and even the language of the Messiah, promising things that only the Messiah could rightfully promise. Alan C. Skinner has also said, "It seems plausible that, like the sign of the dove, the sign of the serpent had been instituted in premortality as a symbol of deity, particularly Jehovah, and later on as a symbol of Jehovah come to earth, or in other words, Jesus Christ, the true God of life and salvation. It also seems plausible that the signs of both the dove and the serpent were made known to God's children in mortality sometime in the distant past. It's interesting to note that at that archaeological site in the Holy Land, where most of the cultic objects bearing serpent imagery had been found, the serpents are usually displayed in association with doves. Now this makes me think of the feathered serpent. These three leaders of these three groups are said to have helped build the ancient temples, including Chichen Itza and Tikal. Another group that came from the east, known as the Irakihu, came in a group of 7 sages with an 8th leader. The heads on Easter Island are believed to be monuments of these giants or leaders, and many of the heads are depicted as having red hair. In Egypt, a group known as the Aku Shamsu Hor showed up in a group of 7 and were followers of the god Horus. Horus was the god up in the heavens. He was the god of the sky and of the light. He oversaw everything on the earth. You've probably heard of the Eye of Horus, symbolizing his all-seeing eye watching over all the people of the earth. These 7 sages that show up throughout ancient cultures all over the world seem to correlate to the 7 days of creation, as well as the 7 seals or 7 periods upon the earth. In fact, the Anishinaabe people have a prophecy known as the 7 Fires Prophecy, in which 7 prophets visited their people at 7 different times, prophesying about future events from these 7 periods. In fact, throughout these prophecies, there is mentioning of a circle, those belonging to the circle and those breaking away from the circle. It was said that during the 6th fire, that children would turn against their parents and their grandparents. The teachings of the elders could not be heard, and the elders would grow sick. They would lose their place in the circle. The circle would be broken. This reminds me of that Greek word kuklos and the Mayan deity Kukulkan. Feathers often symbolized ascension into heaven, as birds flew in the sky and were considered to be the animal who could get closest to heaven. Now back to these 3 leaders that the Mayans spoke about, Itzamna, Kukulkan, and Quetzalcoatl. These names all have similar meanings. Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl are feathered serpents, and Itzamna is another word for iguana, which is a lizard, and it means lizard house or house of the lizard. Now, if the serpent was a deity, well, that would be translated as a house of God, a house of the Lord, a temple. And remember, these groups were said to have helped build ancient temples. Let's take a trip now to the other side of the ocean, to a place off the coast of Italy called Sardinia, a place just as mysterious as its history.
In Sardinia, myths and stories about who these people were typically talk about giants.
My name is Luigi Muscas. I am 53 years old, and I live in Poli Albarei. I've been immersed in the ancient history of the giants of Sardinia ever since I was a little boy. It was handed down to me by my relatives. The first skeleton I ever saw, the first mummy I ever saw, was on a rainy day in the countryside of Poli Albarei. I was out grazing my father's sheep in the fields near the ancient ruins, when suddenly it started to rain. I got caught in a violent thunderstorm. I looked for a shelter among the ruins to get out of the rain, and I found a small stone doorway leading into a megalithic tomb buried in a hillside. When I crawled inside of it, I found the body of a dead giant. He was huge, more than 10 feet long. He was mummified and well preserved. His skin was the same color as mine. He had all his teeth. None one of them was missing. I counted them. There were 32. I wasn't even surprised to find him there. It only confirmed what my relatives had always told me. We were the descendants of the giants. These ruins were left because I stopped the excavators. They wanted to destroy all of this, to plant trees and provide work for the youth. But it was just an excuse to cover up this history. I drove here with my car. I was speeding like crazy to get up here. When I got here, I stopped the excavators who were destroying everything. I told them, stop, and they stopped. They were under specific orders from the authorities to get rid of everything, because these are the last ruins of this lost city, of this history, and they wanted to eliminate it so that nothing would be left.
One can clearly see that the debris of the demolition was simply scattered over the fields. It is evident that at one time in the distant past, dozens of tombs were constructed. A layer of crystallized quartz is still plastered on the exterior of many of the megalithic blocks. The presence of such regal monuments indicates that the deceased entombed between them must have been men of renown. The Nuragic civilization was most likely founded by the Canaanites, who they believed had migrated to the island either before or during the conquest of Canaan by Joshua and the Israelites. Furthermore, they both surmised that, just as the Hebrews had discovered to their dismay, when the Canaanites landed in Sardinia, there were giants in their ranks.
As I was telling you before, different varieties were unearthed. Some of them had elongated skulls. Others had very long chins. I saw one with horns this big, like a cow, and it had 6 fingers. These genes are still around today. Sometimes people are born with them. In fact, there was a boy in our village. They are no longer here, they moved overseas. This boy had 6-toed feet. And this is generational, because his grandfather also had 6-toed feet. These are ancient genes that we Sardinians still carry to this day.
Does the government of Sardinia know that there used to be a race of giants living on this island, in your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion, they know. I think they know, and they are covering everything up. The skeletons were taken to the municipal archive, and now they're gone. I found skeletons, I found artifacts, bronze statues, discovered the first nails made of bronze. And those were taken too, but I was able to get them back. But the skeletons of the giants are gone. Nobody knows what happened to them.
The nuraghe is approximately 7,000 to 8,000 around Sardinia. These towers were the expression of the megalithic architecture, which is also called Cyclopean. The legends mention Cyclops who built these megalithic structures around the island. They might have been very impressive and imposing in those times, because when the nuraghe were first built, the single tower could reach even 28-30 meters height. It was like a skyscraper of the prehistory.
It's been said that Sardinians can trace their descent back to a mythical ancestor or Libyan son of Hercules, or Macarus, which is a Berber word that means to grow, as well as a deity named Melquart. He was revered as a deity going by Sardis Pater Babai. In other words, the Sardinian father or father of the Sardinians, who gave the island its name. These ancient Sardinians were known to be associated with the sea people. These seafaring people were known as the Phoenicians, but they referred to themselves as Canaanites from the land of Canaan. Phoenicians were said to have traveled as far as North America, up to the British Isles, and down to the tip of Africa. A group of Phoenicians, known as the Carthaginians, also sailed to America in the pre-Columbus era.
Frederick Pohl's book, Atlantic Crossings Before Columbus, quotes two Greek accounts of Carthage's secret Atlantic land. So they learned about it, they just couldn't go see it. One is a fairly respected source, Aristotle. He states, in the sea outside the Pillars of Hercules, the Carthaginians found a wilderness with navigable rivers. Carthage, the master of the Western Ocean, which meant the Atlantic, observed that many people attracted by the fertile soil and pleasant climate resided there. Carthage decreed no one else under penalty of death would be allowed to sail there. They kept the land secret. Another Greek writer wrote, there lies a very great island in the vast ocean, many days sail westward from Africa. The soil is fruitful, a great part of it is mountainous, but there's a large plain watered with several navigable rivers, the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, etc. Carthaginian coins, writings, and artifacts have been found in Colorado, New York, Alabama, Georgia, Connecticut, Nevada, and other places. The Phoenicians and Carthaginians sailed the oceans for centuries. They knew the world was round, about a millennium before the Greeks learned it. So we have this myth that the Greeks were the founders of all civilization. In fact, the Phoenicians and Carthaginians would be just absolutely amazed if they could be resurrected now and see that their ancient propaganda was being taught as facts, because the Greeks got this world is flat notion from a disinformation campaign from the Phoenicians and Carthaginians. They knew the wealth that was out on the other side of the Atlantic and other places. They wanted to scare everybody else away. So they invented those maps you see in the ancient world where it shows these monstrous sea creatures that would just gobble ships, So the Carthaginians invented that to scare their enemies off the ocean so they could have a monopoly. And they understood latitude and longitude. They knew how to navigate with the trade winds and the currents back and forth across the oceans with no difficulty. Well, Carthage did have an entire civilization here. Historians discuss two mysterious civilizations in ancient America. The Adena people, who inhabited the Ohio River Valley, they can identify from about 1000 BC onward. Now that's the time of King David and Solomon when they were sending fleets across the ocean until they merged with the Hopewell people around 300 to 200 BC. They died out centuries later, but 300 to 200 BC is a key time as well. That's the time of the Punic Wars, when the Carthaginians were losing to the Romans and more of their people left for their colonial system as refugees. The Presidents Jefferson and Harrison, about the Mound builders, they were wondering if these weren't built by the lost tribes of Israel. And one of the artifacts in an Adena grave was translated by Barry Fell as Punic in the form of an alphabet used in Iberia, that was in Carthage's territory, in the first millennium BC. It was a language of Carthage which was from the Hebrew.
Another pre-Columbian group of people who were known to be great warriors, skilled with the bow and arrow and the horse, were known as the Scythians, a nomadic group from Iran. Eventually, they migrated through Asia and Russia and became neighbors of the Mongols.
One thing I do want to mention about this is the eagle was a common Scythian symbol and a clump of arrows being held in the talon of the eagle. Can you think of a modern country in the world that has its eagle crest with a clump of arrows as its war sign? The United States, which identify as Manasseh, and that was the Massa Getae of Scythia, had the same image. Carthage was a crown colony, just like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, were crown colonies of Great Britain when their kings had real power. The priests of Carthage were called the Kohanim, after the Cohens. The term rabbi was noticeable. Historians state that the sacrificial rites bore a very significant resemblance to the book of Leviticus. The Encyclopedia Judaica also acknowledges that Hebrews, or Israelites from Palestine, were with the Phoenicians when they founded Carthage. Carthage grew strong and rich. They had such a powerful navy that for centuries they forbid the Greeks and Romans to even go out into the Atlantic. That was their private playground and their private domain, because they exploited the Atlantic world for their own wealth. And Carthage was known as an incredibly wealthy city. Carthage had Gibraltar, or as they called it, the Pillars of Hercules. That's one of the gates of their enemies.
Scythians were said to originally have been a fair-skinned people with blue eyes and red hair, and that the men were of a large build. The men and women loved to wear what we would say in today's terms as a lot of gold bling. All of these groups share similar characteristics to another pre-Columbian group known as the Tuatha De Danann. Now, I've talked about this group of people in a separate video, and I'll have a link down below if you'd like to check it out. These were a large, fair-skinned warrior type of people known to also be deities, as they held a power in which they could heal the sick. They also had priests known as Druids, who were believed to have the Levitical priesthood. The Tuatha De Danann came to Ireland by way of the sea and became the high priests and high kings of Ireland. They were depicted in art as very large, bright people, and as you can see, they were covered in gold ornaments, snakes, unicorns, dragons. These are all symbols that we see in the tombs of the giants. This group of people who inspired the book Lord of the Rings eventually were taken over by an incoming invader, and their history was rewritten. They went on the underground, and their history became legend and myth as they became known as the fairies. Their ancient tombs and mounds are evidence that they were no fairy tale. The symbol of the tribe of Dan has always been the serpent, as well as the eagle, the griffin, and the dragon. Now, I've done many videos about dragons and how they show up in so many ancient cultures, as well as on family crests, and of course, in just about every fairy tale. One famous dragon is the Red Dragon of Wales. It was said to haunt the caves and guard the treasures, though there were no red dragons protecting the treasures in the caves in Manti and Wales. Dragon symbols were found inside the tombs of the mummies. In the apocryphal book of Daniel, chapter 14, we read about Daniel killing a dragon. In verse 23, "Now in that place there was a great dragon that the Babylonians revered. The king said to Daniel, 'You cannot deny that this is a living God, so worship him.' Daniel said, 'I worship the Lord my God, for he is a living God. But give me permission, O king, and I will kill the dragon without sword or club.' The king said, 'I give you permission.' Then Daniel took pitch, fat, and hair and boiled them together and made cakes, which he fed to the dragon. The dragon ate them and burst open, and then Daniel said, 'See what you have been worshipping?' To the Celts, dragons were associated with kings and queens and were shown as guardian figures protecting treasure and guarding against evil. Dragons are also used to represent sovereignty, or a chief, or a leader of a clan, such as the Celtic word Pendragon, which means chief. This would make sense with the dragons found in the tomb of the Manti cave. You have a king and a queen. This represents a great chief of a clan.
The house that your dad came down and helped the open house, they have weird things in there, like Viking stuff. And come to find out, the very emblem on the wall is the same dragon head that's on John Brewer's drawing of the two mummies. And when I got talking to her, she says, "Oh, it's not just that we're into Vikings, it's that we're into this ancient civilization." She said, history's not what we think it is. That's been my experience with John Brewer. My father-in-law is Canadian, and he made the statement, history is written by the victors.
Yes.
And my mother always says it's a flat pancake to not have two sides. And I'm convinced that there's history here in the United States that we have never been told. The Smithsonian Institute, there's a whole lot of artifacts that are hidden away on back shelves. And why? Because they didn't want to authenticate the Book of Mormon.
You know, that's interesting too, because as I've been studying giants and the history of giants, there's a whole thing about that as well that's very similar to what you're saying. There's an island off the coast of Italy called Sardinia. There's these mounds with these giants buried in them that's very similar to the Manti Cave. That's why I'm so interested in all of this. People have gone to study this and interview the people that live there, and the people have their stories. You know, I was digging in my garden and I found a femur that was the size of my couch. But when I told the mayor about it, suddenly the Catholic diocese people showed up and took the bones away out of my yard and said I was to never talk about it again and threatened me. And I don't know what happened to those bones. I just know that the Catholic Church came and took them away. This story is told over and over by the people all over the island. Every family seems to know someone who found bones or
but they get taken away.
And when they tell someone, somebody comes and takes it away and from the Catholic Church, but won't tell them why, which makes it so strange with all this mystery shrouded around it. Americans who came to investigate this, and while they were there getting a tour of an area where there's a lot of these mounds, black helicopters come flying in and are just swarming around above them, letting them know, we're watching you. Just things like that where it makes you wonder, you know, why is it so mysterious? What puzzle piece would this solve? You know, how would this change history and what we know and believe today if we had this information? People just think it's strange, you know, they're just bones. Why can't we learn about our history? And the legends have always been that giants lived on that island, that they were exiled to that island. There's a whole story behind it, and now those have become fairy tales. I don't know if you're familiar with the story that's been circulating over the last couple of weeks about these gold plates that were discovered in Saudi Arabia. When they believed, wow, this confirms our story in the Book of Mormon. It's the same story. It's around the same time period. It's a family just like Lehi's family. They just went a different direction. They went into Saudi Arabia. They tell the same story. They have the same symbols on their plates. And this was an evangelical archaeologist. There were two of them, and they were on a Jewish talk show. That's another crazy thing, because I had just started getting ready to do this documentary again, and then this is all over the news, and now everyone's saying it's fraudulent, it's a hoax, it's all made up, just like John Brewer's story. And I see so many similarities. You can just see them kind of unfolding the same way. A Canadian Indian, guardian of his tribe's ancient records by right of ancestry, saw the Brewer plates and claimed that he could read them, as the knowledge had been passed down to him through the generations. Brewer, in order to test the man's ability to understand the writing, secretly took random plates from various boxes and put them together for him to read. If the Indian read easily from one to another, Brewer would know the man was lying. The Indian looked through them and commented how strange it was that they did not go together. One was a history, and another spoke of burial practices, and another of metals and chemistry, and so on. Brewer was so impressed that he gave the man a box of plates to keep. Quote, according to the Canadian Indian, one of the copper plates from the Brewer Cave has a date of 2500 BC and tells of a migration, a voyage across the ocean, of the Tiwa people under a leader called Pyron, who was a leader under a leader, for it was his brother who talked with God. John Brewer, quote, looking up, I find that they are known by a lot of names, but it adds up to what we know as the Jaredites. And there's that pay attention number 144 on this screenshot of a video titled, Why Did Snakes Infest Jaredite Lands During a Famine? And that famine was the beginning of their destruction.
Across the street from me in Moroni, there was a strange family that moved in. One time I went up Maple Canyon. I helped a guy had pulled his truck into the ditch, and he couldn't get it out by himself. And I stopped and helped, and we got it out. Come to find out, that was this neighbor across the street that I'd never known. I came across a lady that my brother had become acquainted with, and she had a book, and it was supposedly translated from plates that a man had found up Wells Canyon. Come to find out, the man was the guy that lived across the street from Moroni. And it has to do with metal plates. He translated it. I've seen a book about it, and all it was a family history. The strange thing about it, these people left in the middle of the night one time. They just went. And it was after they were gone 5 years that I heard about this book, and I read some in it, and I looked at how could I get a copy of this, and it came up this name, and I went to the city hall and asked, sure enough, that was my name. I didn't even know the name.
Oh my goodness!
They were mysterious.
Yeah. Now back to the giants of Sardinia. A study has shown that British-Irish ancestry was widespread in Scandinavia starting during the Viking Age, and ancestry from southern European locals like Sardinia was concentrated in people in southern Scandinavia. According to the Roman historian Sallust, Sardus, son of Hercules, left Libya along with a great multitude of men and occupied the island of Sardinia, which was named after him. Ancient Libya contained many tribes, including the now extinct Sili, a native Berber tribe who were known to be immune to snake bites and were also said to be healers. They were said to have the power to charm snakes. And the Berbers are the indigenous people of North Africa. It's said that the Berbers originate from Arabia and Canaan, and that they were exiled from their first home in Canaan to their second home in Arabia with the slaying of Goliath by David. Therefore, the Berbers are identified with the Philistines, and many writers state that Goliath was the original ancestor of the indigenous North Africans. And speaking of the Philistines, here's a quick rundown on my study on the topic of giants. So giants existed before the flood. They sought to kill Noah. They were large, tall people with great strength. They also existed after the flood. They were said to be the result of the sons of God having children with the daughters of men. They became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown, great warriors and athletes. In the Old Testament, we read about the names of some of these giants. First, we have Rapha of Gath. This means sunken and powerless ones in Hebrew. It also means to repair, heal, or make whole in Greek. He was the father of several giants. He was the father of Goliath the Gittite. He was the father of a son with 12 fingers and 12 toes, who was killed by Jonathan, the son of Shimea, the brother of David. He was the father of Ishbi-Benob. This means he who is from Nob, which is an ancient town in Jerusalem. And he was killed by Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. He was the father of Saph. This means threshold, a type of goblin, and gigantic. And he was killed by Sibbecai, the Hushathite. And the brother of Goliath was killed by Elhanan, the son of Yer-Oregim, a Bethlehemite. Now the very first giant I mentioned was named Rapha, and he was from a place called Gath, which is also Palestine. That's where the name Philistine comes from, Palestine. In other words, Palestine. This means spear in Old Irish. It also means winepress in Hebrew. Then we have the Philistines. The word Philistine means invader in Hebrew. 5 Philistine cities existed: Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath. The Philistines originated as an immigrant group from the Aegean that settled in Canaan around 1175 BC during the late Bronze Age collapse. This uncircumcised group is described in several passages as coming from the land of Caphtor, which is modern-day Crete, before taking control of the coastal region of what is now southern Israel and the Gaza Strip. They warred with their Israelite neighbors, even seizing the Ark of the Covenant for a time. Their representatives in the Bible include the giant Goliath, who was felled by the future King David, and Delilah, who robbed the Israelite Samson of his strength by cutting his hair. Many researchers also tie the presence of the Philistines to the exploits of the Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of tribes that, according to Egyptian and other historical sources, appears to have wreaked havoc across the eastern Mediterranean at the end of the Late Bronze Age in the 13th century and early 12th century BC. In fact, DNA origins point to Greece, Crete, Sardinia, and the Iberian Peninsula. This began as migrants from the West. DNA markers disappear very quickly within 200 years, probably because the Philistines intermarried, and this kind of genetic signature was diluted within the local population. Well, then there was a group of giants called the Anakims. This means neck chain, long-necked, tall in Hebrew. It means rulers in Greek. They were the sons of Anak, and they made the children of Israel feel like grasshoppers. A Cushite tribe from Babel, and of the same race as the Phoenicians, living in Canaan at the time of the arrival of Moses and the Israelites. They were a remnant of the original inhabitants of Palestine before the Canaanites. They were thought by the Hebrews to be descendants of the Nephilim. Then we have a group of giants called the Emims. This name was given by the Moabites, and it means the dreaded ones in Hebrew. They lived in Ar, which was a land that God gave the children of Lot. They were a warlike tribe of giants who were defeated by Chedorlaomer and his allies in the plain of Kiriathaim. Then there was a group of giants called the Zamzumims. This name was given to them by the Ammonites. It means to talk gibberish, or great masters in war, and a people that speak in buzzing, mumbling, or rumbling noises. Then there was the giant known as Og, king of Bashan. He remained of the remnant of the giants. He lived in Rabbath. His coffin was made of iron, and it was 14 feet long. He was the king of the underworld, also a Phoenician deity, and the protector of tombs. Og means to bake round breads on hot stones. It's the root word for ogre. Bashan is the land of the giants. This land was given to Manasseh. Bashan means serpent or dragon. The valley of Hinnom bordered the land of the giants. It was a deep, narrow ravine separating Mount Zion from the so-called Hill of Evil Counsel. It means sorrow, groaning, of the afflicted, wailing, lamentation, purifying fires, a place to spit upon. And last, I learned in my research that in ancient texts, a giant was synonymous with a dragon. They were the same thing, and a dragon was considered to be a seraph. A seraph is a celestial or heavenly being. A giant, therefore, can be considered a celestial or heavenly being. Christ and Satan share the duality symbol of the serpent. It sounds as though the giants and dragons that we know today when we think of a giant or a dragon is a corrupted version of what they once were. And that's what Satan does. He counterfeits and corrupts what God creates. And as I've mentioned before, I believe the story of Jack and the Beanstalk is the story of Jacob's ladder. Jack is a shortened form of Jacob. Now the giants of the Old Testament were said to have 6 or more fingers and toes on each hand and foot. And this gene still lives on today, as there are several unique families throughout the world that have 6 fingers and 6 toes in Brazil, Africa, and other parts of the world. As we see connections to all of these groups of people and tribes, now comes the question, why are there two types of giants? Giants that look like you and I, but just taller, and then giants that have elongated skulls and 6 toes and fingers. Oftentimes, intentional body deformation and modification was a symbol of status. For example, this item right here, known as a torque, was an ornament worn around the neck by early cultures such as the ancient Celts of the European Iron Age. They were an indicator of wealth and status and were mostly worn by men. This was also the custom of the race of giants in the Old Testament known as the Anakims. This has also been seen among the women of the Kayan tribe in Myanmar, well known for wearing brass coils around their necks their entire lives. Several different cultures operated under the belief that elongating the skull increased intelligence. This belief was reportedly held by the Scythians and tribes who lived on Malekula Island. Along with higher intelligence and status, many believed that skull elongation brought them closer to spirits. The Paracas skulls found in Peru are unique when compared to other ancient elongated skulls. They have a cranium capacity up to 25% larger and are up to 60% heavier than the average human skull, unlikely the result of artificial cranial deformation, which can only change the shape but not the size of the skull. A preliminary DNA analysis of the skulls also found mitochondrial DNA that did not match anything yet discovered, but those findings have been disputed. Some cultures performed cranial elongation because they claim that they were instructed to by the gods. The Mayans in particular believed this. The Spanish chronicler Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo reports one Mayan telling an early Spanish missionary that this is done because our ancestors were told by the gods that if our heads were thus formed, we should appear noble and handsome and better able to bear our burdens. Elongated skulls or not, just who were these giants of North America? Utana Jessup shared in her presentation the different names of the different giants referred to by the native people of North America. The first group was the Sitka, a red-haired cannibalistic giant who plagued the ancestors of the Paiutes until they annihilated them. Then there was the Alagui, a giant race of mound builders encountered by the Lenni Lenape and others. The giant people were living east of the Mississippi, building forts and entrenchments. Next is the Starnake. The Navajo described them as a regal race of white giants, endowed with mining technology, who dominated the West. Then there is the Naholo, described by the Comanches as a rich and powerful race of white giants, 10 feet tall, who built mound cities and were wiped out by the Great Spirit for their pride and lack of mercy. These are all reminiscent of the Adena, one of the two groups of mound builders known for their great earthworks in the eastern United States, who lived approximately around 2000 BC to 600 BC. All of these descriptions bearing a striking resemblance to the culture of the Jaredites of the Book of Mormon.
The Old World Roots of the Cherokee reads, what kind of Indians lived in the territory the Choctaw and Chickasaw carved out for their new home? According to their traditions, as confirmed by excavations of bones in Tennessee, it was a race of white giants. How is a Native American greeting used by many tribes such as the Sioux, the Tetons, the Dakota, and the Omaha, and it was to see how many fingers you had on your hand. Corey Daniel is a Native American historian who writes, the showing or shaking of hands came about to show that one was not of tainted bloodline. 5 fingers proved that one did not possess the traits of bloodlust and violence, which always accompanied the descendants of six-fingered giants, or men of renown. Across America, rock drawings of 6-digited hands and feet have been found.
The teachings of our people is that there's only one group of people in all of the world and that is Belashtai, is to say the five-fingered being. Now, I don't think we need to really get carried away sometime when we talk about the five-fingered being. It means the humankind. And some of the concerns of people is that some people have 6 fingers and so on. You know, there's always that thing that's going to happen in nature. But it does not make that person separate. They still have a body, and it still functions the way that a body should function. And that extra finger or that extra thumb, it has no impact on that person's complete being as a five-fingered being or as a being. And the Neh have the teachings that we all have our origin from the first man and the first woman, and so the teachings have always been that way.
In 1882, Sarah Winnemucca, granddaughter of the Paiute Nation chief Winnemucca, recounted their war with the giants. These Sitka were red-headed giants that lived in the mountains. They set booby traps and captured Paiute tribe members and cannibalized them. After 3 years of fighting, the last of the giants were cornered in Lovelock Cave in Nevada. The Paiutes piled brush and wood over the face of the cave and lit it on fire. Some of the giants ran out, only to meet a hail of arrows. The rest died inside. Today at Lovelock Cave, scorch marks scar the entrance. In 1911, a number of 7 to 10 foot tall skeletons were discovered in Lovelock Cave by guano miners. 4 giant skulls from the cave were displayed in a local museum for almost a century. They disappeared in 2010. Here, Sarah Winnemucca wears a dress trimmed with red hair taken from fallen Sitka. My people say that the tribe we exterminated had reddish hair. I have some of their hair which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress which has been in our family a great many years, trimmed with this reddish hair.
And here is a map showing all the locations in North America where giants have been found. Clearly, this was a race of people that stretched all the way across from east to west and north to south. Book of Mormon researchers estimate that the Jaredite population was close to 20 million at the time of their final battles. Here is a size comparison of Harold Wadlow, 5'11", and his son Robert Wadlow, 8'11". This is in 1940, as compared to a 9-foot mummy found in Southern California in 1895. The Brewer Cave mummies were 9 foot 2 inches for the male and 8 foot 10 inches for the female. During the 1920s, Professor Ralph Glidden and his team exhumed 3,781 skeletons of a blonde-haired race of giants. One king was 9 foot 2 inches tall, but the average height was 7 feet. He found that this highly intelligent, fair-skinned race thrived in the West 3,000 years ago. Among the items found were a thin piece of slate, a map rock showing trails to the 4 main burying grounds, while another included trinkets and small stone rings. In addition, the team found the remains of a megalithic Stonehenge-era temple. Were all giants found in North America belonging to the Jaredite nation? Or were there other groups? These answers can best be found by listening to the indigenous people of North America.
There are giants, yes. Traditional teachings of our people, we have stories in that of the past. And a lot of it people would consider, just legends or stories and that have no real meaning. But the majority of the stories that are told by our people are symbolism, symbolic. Very important to understand the symbolism and that associated with the stories that are told. And that is the symbols. For example, giants. Giant, when a lot of people hear the word giant, they want to think about actual human beings that are very big. And I've had comments about the red-haired giant and just giants everywhere, just going about and doing what they do as giants. And that gives the wrong information as far as what giants were. In the teachings of our people, the place that giants are mentioned is where the 2 boys And those are the two boys that go and journey to visit their father. And their purpose to go to their father was to acquire weapons and that they could use against the giants. And so the story goes that the two boys, of course, made the journey to their father that watches us by sunlight. And it is that they made that journey and they encountered guides along the way. They encountered mentors and people that were very wise, and that these people made them aware that there was only one path to the Father, and that if they took the wrong path at any time along the way, it would lead to their destruction. And so they had to be very cautious as they journeyed on this path to see their father. And their purpose was to go to their father and to get weapons to come and destroy the yei, the things to fear, the things that are fearful and destructive. These things were destroying the neh. But the way that the neh teach about the yei, so the big fear, the word itself, yei, so yei means fear. When it's big fear, it's so. So the word yei, so means big fear. The teaching that goes along with it is that the boys went to see their father and to acquire weaponry that would allow them to use it against these things that were destroying the neh. And the father did give them the weapons and that. And the boys returned and they destroyed the big fears, the things to fear. Yay, so. And then when they finally do get to the father, he subjects them to testing. So he tests them physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But over the years, because of the way that the story is told, many times we get the wrong impression that these were actual physical beings that were out there doing destruction and destroying the people in a physical way. It is in a physical way, but it also is the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual way that people are destroyed. And so the yeitso is the big fear. And the big fear in everybody's life is different. None of us actually experience the same type of fear. Some of us might be fearful of darkness, but not all of us are fearful of the same things. The traditional teachings of our people is yeitso, is our individual fears and that actually can destroy us. If it destroys us, it can destroy our families, it can destroy our communities, it can destroy whole societies of people. And so these are the real giants. And those things that we allow into our lives, the destructive types of behavior, the destructive types of thinking, and the destructive types of things of doing. And these are the yeitso. These are the things to fear. So we have people in the world that spread this fear. And so it was that when the boys went to see their father and to acquire weapons, one of those weapons was the idea of recognizing that you are the offspring of the most sacred of beings, which is the maker, the creator, and the supreme being. I think that when we understand our relationship with the supreme being, it is on an individual basis. Each of us have direct contact with that being. And so it is that is one of the weapons that is given to the two boys, is the idea of having a relationship with your deity. As you understand that being, and which could be your highest power, the higher power. The weapon of prayer and having a relationship with your deity is only one weapon. But the other thing is that of faith. In our traditional teaching, we have the four affirmations and the four sacred directions. To the east, thinking; to the south, planning; to the west, life or living; and then, of course, to the north is that of hasse, is what they call it. Now, a lot of times it's translated to say supposedly hope, but it's not. It is actually more of a word that says faith. And so faith is a very necessary part of the weaponry, and that is used against the things that are giants that can destroy you and destroy your families and your societies. And that is the idea of combining faith with prayer. and knowing that the holy people are the ones that are in charge, and they are the ones that allow some of these things to happen. And so faith and prayer are the weapons that were given to the two boys by their father. And the teachings about Yates so may be a disappointment to people because they want it to be the Jolly Green Giant or the giant out of Jack and the Beanstalk. There are giants, and there are evidence of people that were very tall, and they lived their lives, and Ardenne were aware of people that were of great height, but actually it is the personal fears that you have. Some fears are good, but some fears are very destructive.
And of course, there's always a growing fascination and curiosity when archaeology and anthropology crosses paths with the supernatural. Navajo historian Wally Brown offers an important caution about this topic.
And so there's such things as infatuation with aliens, infatuation with Bigfoot, and we think that they are normal, but they are not. These things are all distractions, and people think that sometimes they are cute cartoon characters and cartoon things, but it is that they are actually real, but they are made real by the power of the evil one and the influence that he has. And it's very powerful and it's very real that he did give them the weapons and that to return to the surface of Mother Earth with the weapons that they needed to destroy all of the giants that were killing the five-fingered being or the surface people. The other giants the two boys had to destroy were created by the five-fingered beings themselves, and this was done by the perverted sexual behavior that took place during the separation of the sexes. Now there is traditional stories about where first man and first woman had an argument, and it could progress to the point of where all of the women went to one side of the river and the men remained on one side of the river. And during that time, they indulged in perverted sexual behavior. And that's what brought into existence these things and that were considered evil giants. And so the story goes that the evil giants were actually living things. And the giants, of course, were beings that would destroy the mind, and it would destroy the heart, and it would destroy the body, and it would destroy the spirit. And these were the type of giants that the Serpent people, or the five-fingered being, or the Dene, had to deal with. And so the two boys, of course, acquired the weapons and that to destroy these evil giants. The story about the two boys, we don't look so much for the actual physical existence of the red-haired giant or the existence of tall, large people that we could consider giants. Yes, there were giants in the land and in the country, but they are just people. Just like the teaching that says they are also the children of the holy people. We have to understand that the symbolism in that are of a higher learning, and you have to understand that there are so many different ways to understand the symbolic presentations and that in the traditional oral history. So it is that we have to understand things on a spiritual level to be able to see things in a spiritual way, to be able to hear teaching in a spiritual way. If you try to understand these things in a non-spiritual way, it's not something that's going to be acceptable to you, and you won't be able to comprehend the symbolism and that is being taught at a spiritual level. And that is a very important thing. And so the symbolism and that of the two boys' journey to their father to acquire weapons and to come down and destroy the giants and that. And the giants are, of course, giants that are actually in our lives today. And so what are these real giants? People want to know. We are surrounded by these giants. All of us have individual and even many giants in our lives that we have to contend with. And those giants, of course, are such things as giant hate of goodness, giant ignorance, and then giant hate of liberty, giant hate of our fellow men, or the giant society of lawlessness and of giant disobedience, giants of greed. And there are just so many different giants in that we have to deal with in our lives, individual lives, and in society itself. The end game of all of these giants is actually to destroy us. And we can allow that to happen if we don't understand and comprehend the dangers that these giants in our lives are a threat to us. And they are here to mislead, to pervert, and destroy the things of goodness in our lives or in our environment or in our families or anywhere that we are living as the five-fingered being, as a surface being, or as the human being. And that's what these giants in our lives, and that's the big symbolism in that. That's so very important to understand. The other thing to understand is that to conquer and destroy the giants in your life requires change and growth on your part. And any type of change or growth is a very painful experience, and most people don't want to do the changing required, and they get devoured by these evil giants in their lives. But the holy people understand that when we require and ask for their help, and they are there for us because we are their children. They are concerned about us. There's not even really any way to change the world. You have to change yourself, and the change requires something from inside of you and at a spiritual level. And the evil giants that you are dealing with are actually like living beings in many ways, and you encounter them. You can accomplish the things you need to do, and you can battle the giants in your life, and you can overcome them and not let them destroy you. And the holy people are there to help you. You are one of their children, is the way that we are told.
Speaking of battling giants, what became of John Brewer and the Manti Cave? With all of the publicity bringing unwanted media attention to the small town of Manti and Temple Hill, a metal fence was erected to keep trespassers and treasure hunters out. John Brewer eventually passed away in 2007 from emphysema, and his wife would pass away a few months later. And during that time, the family and the community stepped back from the spotlight. The story faded over the years. In online family trees and on family history websites, all mentions of it and references to it have been scrubbed away. After years of persecution, being labeled as a fraud, and the topic of local rumors, it seems that time has slowly healed the past.
There's a lot of questions that I wish were answered. It would really open our eyes up to a whole nother civilization that might have been there at that time. Some people say this really happened, and other people say that it never did happen. I think when the Lord's ready for us to know more, we'll find more things, and more information will come forth.
Well, I think there's a whole lot of history that hasn't fit the format, and it's been just covered up. Someday we're going to find out what's all around us, and it's been right under our feet, and we didn't know it was even there.
That's right. Since working on this documentary, I have noticed over the last couple of months there's been an uptick with interest in conversations on YouTube all about revisiting older discoveries and locations, as well as recent discoveries of ancient artifacts and records, whether here in Utah or other places in the world. Orson Pratt once said, "Thou, O Lord, makest the earth to disclose its wonders. Thou bringest forth truth from the bowels thereof. Thou openest the gates of wisdom, and showest thy word unto the sons of men. Hidden things are brought to light, things most precious to the soul. Let the hills and mountains break forth into singing. Let the earth itself utter songs of everlasting joy. Let glory, honor, and everlasting power be unto him who sitteth upon the throne, who holdeth the keys of creation and redemption forevermore." The particular place in the hill where Moroni secreted the book was revealed by the angel to the prophet Joseph Smith, to whom the volume was delivered in September of 1827. but the grand repository of all the numerous records of the ancient nations of the western continent was located in another department of the hill, and its contents under the charge of holy angels, until the day should come for them to be transferred to the sacred temple of Zion. The hill Cumorah with the surrounding vicinity is distinguished as the great battlefield on which and near which two powerful nations were concentrated with all their forces, men, women, and children, and fought till hundreds of thousands on both sides were hewn down and left to molder upon the ground. Both armies were Israelites. Both had become awfully corrupt, having apostatized from God. The Nephites as a nation became extinct. The Lamanites alone were left. This happened according to their faithful records, near the close of the 4th century of the Christian era. The American Indians are the remnants of the once powerful nation of the Lamanites. The hill Cumorah is remarkable also as being the hill on which and around which a still more ancient nation perished, called the Jaredites. This unparalleled destruction is recorded in the Book of Ether and happened about 6 centuries before Christ. The Jaredites colonized America from the Tower of Babel. After about 16 centuries, during which they became exceedingly numerous, they, through their terrible wars, destroyed themselves. The hill Cumorah, by them, was called Ramah. Millions fought against millions until the hill Ramah and the land round about was soaked with blood, and their carcasses left in countless numbers unburied to molder back to Mother Earth. There is no spot on this wide world of ours which is calculated to excite more vivid reflections than the wonderful hill Cumorah. There the history of one half of our globe reposed for 14 centuries in profound, unbroken silence. There the everlasting gospel engraved, not on tablets of stone, but on plates of gold, awaited the voice of the heavenly angel to reveal the priceless treasure. There, buried in the holy archives of Cumorah's sacred hill, are plates of brass, plates of gold, undimmed by time, sacredly guarded as the temple of heaven. There shines the Urim and Thummim, the stones of light, the gems of immortality. There reposes in words of light the hidden knowledge of ages past, the prophetic history of ages to come. There wisdom has selected her palace, and understanding her dwelling place, until the Spirit is poured out from on high, and the skies pour down righteousness. Then the earth opens and brings forth salvation. Perhaps, instead of being on a quest to discover caves and find treasures, we ought to recognize and appreciate the treasure we already have. In the words of President Holland,
I cannot say the smallest part of which I feel, and that's how I feel about the Book of Mormon. I can't say the smallest part to you about what I feel. And I look forward with great anticipation to other records and other parts, 100 times as much than is contained in the book we have. If that much is available out there, the least we can do is read the book that we've got, because there's a lot of other good stuff coming. I love you. Bye-bye.
do you suffer from dry, itchy, flaky skin? Tired of wasting money on products that don't work? Hi, I'm Lindsay Reach, the creator of Hydro Heal, a product that's been changing dry skin for almost 2 decades. I created Hydro Heal back in 2008 as a solution for my own dry feet. Countless pedicures and dermatologist visits weren't making a difference. And who has the time or energy for this method? Word on the street spread, and Hydro Heal gained the attention of Shark Tank investors and venture capitalists launching it on a nationwide TV campaign, gaining interest and attention from celebrities on live TV. See it to believe it demos and try before you buy? Put Hydro Heal in the spotlight, selling out of product at every show. After my feet were transformed, I decided to test it on eczema, dry lips and hands, athlete's foot, and cradle cap. And the results were incredible. Brand new skin in just 7 days. But it gets even better. Hydro Heal was also tested on a recovering hospital patient with an ongoing leg wound that would not close. After 3 days, this was the result. A wound that closed, healthy skin, and doctors were amazed. So how does Hydro Heal work? It's a solid ointment made from natural ingredients that turns into a liquid on contact with your skin, seeping down into deep cracks, while acting like a bandage, creating an invisible barrier on the surface, protecting your skin from outside elements, allowing it to naturally repair from the inside out. Start feeling more comfortable in your skin today, because everyone should love their skin. Click down below for a special offer or visit hydroheal.com.